We have a quorum. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Certainly. Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Kotar. Here. Alderman Ogilvie. Here. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley.
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Present.
Chairman Roddy.
Present.
Mr. President, you have 6, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
don't promote me. The president's going to be in here a little later, and he'll be upset if you call me president.
No, that's I said.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Couple housekeeping things. I want to apologize. We've had a bit of struggle all this session with getting these bills properly posted, and it was particularly confusing this time because we had Monday off. So we've been struggling with trying to make sure we have them all posted with the 24-hour notice. Lisa, Alderwoman Middlebrook, if anyone is down here for her board bill, she was not ready to have this heard, so that was improperly publicized. President Reed's board bill was posted not till 10 o'clock, so we'll probably hold off on that for a little while. And then we'll, depending upon how we're doing this morning, and I believe Alderwoman Davis was the same way, so those two board bills will be held off till about 10 today so that we have a 24-hour notice on them. And then we've been trying to act more like a committee, and as a result, we're trying to have reports from different people that are working on different projects. And so to that end, we would like to start off with a report from the alderman from the 16th, who's been heading up our performance measure work, and he has, I think, the assessor that he's going to introduce today and give us a little update on what he's been doing. Sure. Proceed, Alderman. Great.
I printed off slides. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Look at this. I have copies up here. But if you recall, it was the end of November, I believe, the last that myself and Mr. Hollins gave just a report of where we think we're going with identifying the appropriate performance measures to help us or guide us, act as a barometer, if you will, toward the proper use of incentives and how we're tracking their use and what value they're bringing. And we talked about wanting to get down to the neighborhood level. So some of these slides are just a quick recap, and I'll go through them. The first, if you remember, we talked about there's really two buckets of performance measures. One is the economic viability of the city, sort of a return to the city, if you will, and then citizen quality of life. What does that mean? Population growth, et cetera, median household incomes, items like that. So we talked about economic viability at great length, and that's on the second slide, where there's really three main, we think, measurements or metrics that we're going to use, which is sales tax, property tax, and earnings payroll tax revenue. We also did a list of performance measures on the third slide there of around that citizen quality of life bucket. And those measures, we continue to try to cultivate the right partners to bring in and help us with that, whether they're research partners, institution partners, using a little bit of the census information. So that data is not ready for prime time, but we're still taking suggestions and cultivating a conversation around who else we want to kind of bring in here, and whether it's departments of the city or external partners that exist. So that, in a way of an update, those conversations continue to happen. And I think we were tasked last November with, and I'm on the fourth slide now, which is let's try to just pick one or two and maybe just throw some data together in a collective way, and give you guys an idea of where we want to go. So I really just picked property tax revenue because that was kind of I think the one we could get some hands on, and then wanting to pick an incentive, and we're still working on getting a complete and comprehensive list of projects. SLDC has that information, and not to their fault, but they have it and it's just disjointed, and we need to drill down to make sure the validity of that information is something we want to work with. But we do have a little bit of information, and I was able to just quickly, this is some of the work that the chairman did a little bit prior to me really grabbing a hold of this project. And that was really just, let's grab property tax revenue and let's grab a couple incentives, TIF and SID, because we can get our hands readily on that information. And how would we trend it and how would it look like? So I caution you on the 5th slide, what looks like a sort of a very boring spreadsheet. I caution you to dig into this because this data is really not complete and it doesn't have all the variables that I think we want it to have. But I think it gives us an idea of trend lining. Here's incentives, here's incentive amounts, kind of total subsidy, and here's the total tax we've collected from a 2010 to a 2016 period. We'd love to get 17 data. That's coming up next. But this really gives us a sense of being able to at least look at changes that may or may not exist in those times. What does it mean? Probably what this spreadsheet is again, done a little bit admittedly in haste, but it's going to lead us to just more questions. I think more questions around our collection of property tax revenue, and our TIFs, where our TIFs are in the process, and that's where I think the assessor who's joined us today, Mr. Chairman, can kind of talk a little bit more about our use of TIFs and where they are in the process. Are they coming off? How many more have we done? That's some information he's collected that I think you're going to find pretty valuable, and that's information that needs to get incorporated into this. The last slide is really, we talked about a model structure, and those are items that we need to add to the spreadsheet or the previous spreadsheet, which are things of, can we get down to industry type? We know we need to get down, this is broken down by ward, but we know we need to get down a little bit further on a project by project basis. So this was just, again, a quick screenshot of how we think we want to begin trend lining, but we definitely know we need to add columns and rows to this information so that we can look at it in a more analytical way, and which will likely lead us to some more questions. So my goal is to next dig into the earnings tax, because I think that was also an identified important performance measure around the economic viability of the city. So the next task is going to be working with Greg Daly's office and Tom Vollmer to try to isolate some earnings tax broken down similar to this spreadsheet, and then hopefully layer in project specific information along with other asset type or project type information, subsection information such as nonprofits, the things we've talked about, and industry class, submarkets. I think the alderman from the 24th talked about spatial concerns and market segments. I think that also needs to get incorporated in here. But this is really just to give you a quick update on, I wanted to just grab a couple and throw some data together that would help us, or at least give us a snapshot of how we want to start analyzing this on a ward by ward basis and really where it can go. So I hope by maybe, next meeting or the meeting after, depending on the agenda size, to have a lot more around the earnings tax incorporated into this analysis. So I'll take questions, or we can bring up the assessor, which might be pretty interesting
Sure.
to have him talk about. Kind of,
We're honored to have our former colleague from the previously of the 8th Ward. I guess he still lives in the 8th Ward, but now the assessor. And he's been working on a project that has been kind of near and dear to me for a long time, and I think he can speak to the challenges we have in collecting this data. Go ahead, Alderman.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I do have Mr. Dave Donald, our development coordinator, who is the person actually in our office who is in charge of analyzing each one of these property transfers as it comes to our attention and gets it into our 1983 software system in a fashion that we can pull data, issue the correct real estate tax bills, and also give the different taxing entities pilot. tax bills and generate the information in a usable format. And I'm a little bit new to that office, and from the standpoint, when I saw the data that would be available to us, we decided to go ahead and run it in a fashion that I think can shed some light of where we've been and where we're going. And then you'll have the ability to decide where we're going in the future. You and the mayor's office can look at these numbers. I know that the mayor's office has them, and they're in the process of continuing to build their model. But I'll walk you through this kind of quickly, and I'll answer any questions. But that first box, base value of properties going into abatement. So what I did is we took 2015, 16, and 17, and said, when you go into tax abatement, there's a base value that that business continues or that owner continues to pay real estate taxes on. And so we've sat there and captured, this is what has gone in either as assessed value or market value in each of those past 3 years. We've broken it between residential and commercial, and then we gave you the total values, the assessed value and the market values. So in that first box, that's the number that the city will continue to collect real estate taxes on. If those base values grow, because the market values actually go up, you'll continue to collect more. Everything on this schedule as we go through it is in 2017 assessed dollars. So even though I might be looking out 5 years, we're using the 2017 numbers. Then the next box, properties going into abatement. For 15, 16, and 17, this is the market value and assessed value year by year that actually went into tax abatement. And the way we track these
I'm sorry, Alderman, I'm having trouble following which
the second one down.
Okay, so make sure I understand the first one. So in 2015, there was $3.6 million of assessed value of residential property, which reflected about a $19 million value, and we were collecting $97,000 well, not for that, but for all of it, we were collecting $97,000.
Right, and we'll continue to collect that. That's the base value that the city continues to collect on.
Okay, and that's for 15, 16, and then 17. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the next one down starts properties going into abatement.
Right, so these would be all of the board bills that were passed 15, 16, 17, where they've turned in their schedule and have completed the project and have gone into tax abatement. And that would be the market value and the assessed values year by year of the projects of the abatable amount, not of the whole project, but just of the amount that is being abated. And so if you come across like the total values, in 2015, the market value that went into tax abatement was $125 million. 2016, the market value that went into tax abatement was $174 million. And in 2017, the market value that went into tax abatement was $84 million. And we've run under that, we've run two schedules. One is just the total tax dollars being abated among all of the entities, and then the city's portion, the actual portion that the city of St. Louis would receive. Now what we've done in the next box down is we said, well, let's look at the properties that have come out of tax abatement. And when a piece of property comes out of tax abatement, that abated amount, we treat that as new property, which are all new taxes, and it goes on the tax rolls. And for the most part, when you look at 15, 16, and 17, you got to remember most of these things occurred 10 years earlier, and now the 10 years are up, or if it's a 353, it could be 15, or the 25 years, whatever the original length is. So then we went back and looked at everything that came out of abatement and is new taxes for the city of St. Louis. So if you were to look at 2015 coming out of abatement, you can see that the total value of what came out of tax abatement in 2015 was $132 million, generating new taxes. So in 2015, more came out than went in. If you look up at the box on top, more came out than went in. 2016, a little bit less came out than went in. But in 2017, to put it in perspective, we have a little technical issue from the tax abatement side. The Argyle Chase came out of tax abatement in 2017, but it automatically went into a pilot. So we don't really get, or the rest of the TIF years, but we don't really get those funds. Now, my understanding is the money is there to pay it off, and we will get the funds in the next 3 or 4 years. So I'll take that out, and I'll move over to the last column without that one to give you, more credible numbers as to what we're really collecting. But in 2017, $127 million came out of tax abatement as new construction. And then if you look up, only $84 million went into tax abatement. So the net to the city there on those properties is worth $43 million to the good. And then what we did with this information is I said, well, okay, well, let's take this information and project it out into the future so that everyone here can see, well, where are we going for the next 5 years? I mean, that's just about all that we could quantify. But for future years, this is the amount that's going to come out year by year out of tax abatement. And so in 2018, market value, $72 million is going to come out. And in 2019, $74 million is going to come out. 2020, $67 million is going to come out. In 2021, $40 million is going to come out. And then in 2022, $16 million is going to come out. Now you say, well, in 2022, why is that number so small? Because you got to think back 10 years how bad the economy was and nobody was doing anything. So you're going to have less coming out at a later date. For the most part, most of the tax abatements, and I know that we've scheduled them differently, and I see a lot coming to our office with it's Chapter 99. It's in theory 10-year tax abatement, but it's 5 years of pilots that we get our funds. So we'll be able to handle those numbers with our new software to give you a little bit more accurate future predictions on those numbers. The other thing we did finally at the bottom line is we looked at the TIFs that are going to come off the rolls and be full tax paying to give you a perspective of, what's that coming. Now, the nice thing is the TIFs don't overlay with 10-year tax abatement. Generally, they're 23 years. So I got a 10-year, and then I got 23 years expiring in that time frame. But in 2021, no matter what happens, we will get our money on the Chase Argyle. And so in 2021, you can see that $157 million is coming back online, plus the $40 million that's coming out of tax abatement. You would have $197 million coming online in that particular year that will be new funds for the city and all of the taxing entities. Then when you go out to 2022, even though we only have $16 million coming off of tax abatement, we have $76 million coming in from the TIFs, and that's mostly the convention hotel project. Now, all of these numbers, these future numbers, are based on our 2017 assessed values. And that would be the same thing with the TIF property. We continue to reassess those over to the side, so that when you have a piece of property that's tax abated, we run a shadow property so that we can continue to track the value of the improvements on that property, even though it's tax abated. So all these numbers and out into the future is in the 2017 assessed values. The comptroller's office has a comprehensive list on the TIF projects that are expiring. I mean, I can tell you as you look out, the vast majority of the TIFs that we did were in 2000, 2001, 2002, and 3. So years 8, 9, and 10 out, you're going to have a lot of TIFs that have expired and will generate new dollars. That is the compilation of the information that we have. We're happy to work with you. Some of it is SLDC generally will have most of this information, but Mr. Dave Donald in my office understands how we've coded in our system. We're able to pull out the data to put it in a format that hopefully will be helpful to you. I'm open. Any questions?
Alderman, can you kind of put this in perspective for us? I'm thinking that this represents what, about any given year's 1 or 2%. What's rolling out is about 1 or 2%. What's the total assessed value? Let's see.
Do we have that?
No, they can't hear. They can't hear.
Okay, let me try this again. What I was asking is trying to get some order of magnitude by getting a sense of you know, what the value of total assessed values is, and then I presume we assess non-for-profits, but we don't tax it. Is that correct? So then we could have, if we had total assessed value, then the amount of non-for-profit, you know, the percent not-for-profit, and do we? I guess do we assess LRA property?
No, we do not. What we do with the not-for-profits, and I previously had retrieved those numbers, what we do for the not-for-profits is we take them off the assessed rolls. We have the historical data from the year that we pulled them off, or the building permits, but we do not reassess not-for-profits because it's, and you know, it could be something that we change, but we don't do a reassessment on those because it is of no benefit to us. So the numbers that I had previously used 5 or 6 or 8 months ago on the not-for-profits were premised on more or less historical value and no value growth because we don't reassess those.
So what would be, do we have like the total, what's the total assessed value that we're collecting taxes on?
I don't have that number, but I'll get you the full number. And I would just be wrong if I told you
Sure.
what it is, but it's a large number. I mean, I don't even want to speculate. I have it in my mind.
I'm thinking that we're collecting probably $250 to $300 million in real estate taxes for, I think it's for all entities.
Right, and basically, I would always multiply, that's 2% or 50. Okay.
So that would be 50 times that, which would be 300.
We'll get you the exact number.
Okay. Why don't we go through the committee and see if we have any other questions here. Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions? Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Sure, I have a couple questions. How would you know, or how are you alerted when a TIF expires earlier because the project did so well that they paid it off in 17 years versus 23 years, for example?
Our office is not unless we receive the information. The comptroller's office, I don't know that they're the exclusive on the TIFs, but they maintain the TIF list and then they pay out the funds.
Okay, then but someone alerts you that it's paid off and you can start actually getting 100%.
Yes. Now, Mr. Dave will, come on up, Dave. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Dave can tell you exactly how he gets notified of that.
Typically the comptroller's office will tell us when a TIF expires. Typically, they'll send me a report once or twice a year.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure who this question to be addressed to, but I'm curious as to how many TIFs actually have been paid off early so that it would show that we're getting, you know, tax revenue back at a more rapid pace than we expected.
You know, we had, We had that presentation near the end of last year, Alderman. We had, I think Tom Ray brought it down. Tom, didn't you bring a workshop? We had to pass a bill once a year, kind of dating, showing.
Brings those in, but
Okay.
Lisa Harmon would know that, Alderman Floyd,
In whose office?
comptroller.
Okay.
She's in charge of the TIF section.
Okay, and back to Mr. Conway. Thank you, Tom. Out of curiosity, is there a way to calculate over the past 10 years how many properties that were once assessed but acquired by a non-for-profit and now there's no assessment on? And the reason I ask that, because I know there's a lot of phenomenal work that has been done by St. Louis U, WashU, a lot of the educational institutions. And so when they buy up real estate and use for educational purposes, then it falls off the tax roll. Do we know what those numbers are? Can we find out what those numbers are based on the past 10 years?
We have a person that's in charge of that, and I can tell you right now they're bringing all of the applications for tax exemption in for my signature, so I'm going through them, but it'll be a stack of files about that tall. But we are now keeping that information. We can go back. Some of the problems that we have with our office, it's not a problem. The data collection, it's in the city's mainframe, and we're in the process of getting the new software up and running, that we have to go in there and pull a program to pull out the data that we want. But I probably can look back at 17, and get that fairly readily. And but we are tracking it now internally for 2018. And then, and I can tell you, over half of the ones that I've looked at so far are ones that are coming off of tax rolls and going into exempt status. And we'll provide you that data.
Do you think you can go back 10 years?
Dave, that's really not his bailiwick, but he might be able to. Come on up, back up, Dave. He sits next to the lady that's in charge of the exempt property.
I'll answer by saying probably. I know the way we code things in the system, we should be able to do that. I can't guarantee how accurate it'll be, but.
Okay. I'm just kind of curious, and I asked the question because we're looking at incentive reform. We're looking at, how much is out there on a TIF, how much is on tax abatement, but there's not much conversation about how much have come off the tax rolls due to nonprofit acquisition. And of course, some of the argument is, although it's nonprofit, they created, 2,000 jobs, so the earning tax went up. So I'm just trying to look at the total picture to try to get a better perspective on where we are as far as, taxation.
We can certainly tell you what's come off the books from exemptions, yeah. Just a matter of submitting the right query.
Okay. All right, I'll look for that information. Thank you. No further questions.
Alderwoman Davis, any questions?
I have a couple of questions. I'll continue in the line Alderman Boyd was on. So when you're looking at this data, can you also, I think it's a good use to determine the purpose of the property, because everything that is acquired by a nonprofit may not always be used for the purpose of the nonprofit, for the reason that they got their tax exempt status. And so we just went through that a few years ago with St. Louis University, and so we now receive taxes on parking lots that they have. Also, it would be good to find out if, as you're looking at the use for those properties, if we could find out the number of parcels that are owned by specific entities. so we can calculate that as well, to have some idea of where the majority of property is owned. That would be nice. But I wanted to ask you another question here. When I look at the assessed value and market value and how much we have received, rather increased receipts. It's interesting because the city of St. Louis is a non-earning, in a sense, if you look at a regular corporation that is for profit, we are not a for-profit entity. But based on the investments that were made here with incentives, we're doing pretty good as far as increasing our earnings. If you look at the values here, and I would assume that if we went back 10 years, we'd really see a huge increase from where the tax base was. And so in your future analysis, could we also, the line here where it says city's portion, could we also give, but for those who don't know, could we also give the information for the other recipients of the dollars that are collected? So for the college district and so on and so forth.
Right. In each of those entities are interested in that, and so the tax dollars being collected is all of those. When you see the little pie chart on your property tax bills, is the total that is being collected, and then you can break it down. I think there's 13 or 14 entities that are getting a little bit of your real estate. Well, some bigger, some small.
Our committee has a lot of new people, and so they don't know, they may not necessarily know that. And so what I'd like to do, and just give us a key to work with, that's all.
Right. You know, we'll come up with that chart, because I need one, because some of the neighborhood groups want a little presentation, and we're prepared to do that, because they're thinking, well, you know, the values, the reassessment caused my taxes to go up. Well, no, there's a combination of things. You had some reassessment, you may or may not have gone up, but we also had a large tax increase from August of 16 that probably, in most cases, would have increased your bill more.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And then I will tell you on the prior years, we do track, and then on the exempt properties, even if it's a not-for-profit, it has to be used for their charitable purpose. Generally, they are 501c3s, so other people could qualify under the Missouri statute, but I had one, it was a property, the one that we're saying is taxable, was a public school, an entity had bought it, a church had bought it, but they're not doing anything with it. So that is actually going on the rolls. They bought it from the school district. But I would say that we are enforcing the best, and the rules, the state statute, the best they can. If they don't like what we do, then they can appeal it to the state tax commission. But I have a jaundiced eye on that.
I understand.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Cotard.
Thank you, Mr. Assessor. Appreciate you being here today. I guess to the Alderwoman's point, and I should know this number, but I don't. So if you're looking at, on your top box, tax dollars being collected, city's portion, just look at 2017, for example. Right. 1.1 is the tax dollars being collected, city's portion is 200. Of your real property taxes collected, what percentage goes to the schools? Do you know that off the top of your head? 60? 61? Right. Okay, 61, and then the rest is broken down amongst those various 13 entities?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned, I guess getting away from this chart, you mentioned your 1980s software. Could you talk to us about sort of what, are you working to kind of modernize and update your office? You mentioned that this is labor intensive given your technology challenges over there at the assessor's office.
Yeah, so there's two projects going on, and hopefully we can do a demonstration of the one that we're closest. One is digital parcel mapping. So if you go into, look up the property and you see kind of a little sketchy picture of a city block with the things. Right now, all of our city blocks and data are on those big books in there, and if you haven't seen them, Alderman, it's a pretty amazing thing, but every city block has a big, thick piece of cardboard, and then that's how we maintain a structure, and we have a GIS right now, but it's not that accurate. So part of this project is that we've contracted out some time ago to digitize and eliminate those books. And so right now, that area of our office is looking at every digital city block that came in as the base model, verifying street widths, vacations, ordinance, private alleys, and making sure that the data on the digital version is accurate. And once we build this base model, it will save us a tremendous amount of time. The records will be so much more accurate. What you see if you go to the St. Louis County Assessor's webpage, their little parcel mapping is a little bit better and will give you a little bit more information. We'll be far ahead of what they have, that you'll be able to click on it, find the owner, taxes, not taxes. But the most important thing for the city is then our other departments, SLDC, you can draw whether it's a tip, will have access to a tremendous amount of data. The street department will be able to build their model on the things that they want. The fire department will be able to take the next level, that this is our base model of the city. And it'll be interactive in that you'll be able to measure the width of the street or the alley, or if I'm trying to get a fire truck down the street and I want to know if I can sit at the headquarters and measure that. And then part of this project will be that we will fly a drone over the city and do 1/3 of the city every 3 years and come in at an angle so that you'll be able to do up and down measurements. Was that a 6-foot tall fence or an 8-foot tall fence, or that they violate the code? So it will be that the whole city, all of the departments will be able to add layers of what is relevant to them. On the rest of the software, it was approved, I guess, a couple of years ago, to put in a total new computer-aided mass appraisal system, which ours is from 1983, and we're under some severe restrictions with that because it's based on cost, and that's all that it was available. So when we do the reassessment, we have a formula that's in there that says based on historical costs, your property's worth this. Reassessments then get adjusted by neighborhood to make sure that they're relatively accurate, but we don't actually at that point in time use comparable sales or certificates of value. This new system will allow us to do all three methodologies when we do the whole city or any particular neighborhood. It will also take the data of the ownership and populate the digital parcel mapping system. So it will be updated continuously. And the most important thing is it will save us a tremendous amount of labor in the mapping department over time, because the people over there have little electric erasers because they have to erase but gently every page and then put it on. So you're going to see a tremendous amount of data available. It will also make it easier, I know, that in one of the wards or one or two places, some of the SID calculations weren't done right, or the people slightly overpaid to their SIDs or the community business districts. The system was designed in 1983, and over there in the IT department, they continue to do tweaks to match whatever currently and legislatively is out there. But when the system was designed, all of these conceptual things of community improvement districts and special districts and overlay districts, and so everyone takes a different run and a little programming for the people in the IT department. So the new system is already patterned to accept it. The company that is doing this, I think, has actually done the implementation in Jefferson County, a number of counties in the state of Missouri.
Alderman,
No further, thank you.
Alderman Ogilvie?
Thank you, Mr. Conway. I guess one, so prior to the analysis of incentives we had a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point, it was always, there was a lot of speculation on sort of the total value of all the incentives. And that report, the PFM study is what I'm referencing. That report gave us kind of a starting line for looking at this stuff. This is sort of comparable, but I'm wondering if there's a way to just keep track of, on an annual basis, like the total percentage of, let's just say, city tax that we don't collect because of incentives, or the total percentage of of the city's market value that we're not taxing.
Yeah, we will be able to provide that information, and with this accounting, Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB 77, that's out there, it requires us to present those numbers the best available. And it's a relatively, I say relatively new, 3 or 4 years old standard. And sometimes when we present it, we're presenting it for all tax dollars collected, when really we're the city of St. Louis, the school district is their own, and whatever, but we're presenting it for all at this point in time, and or the comptroller's office is. But we'll have the ability, when we set up the parameters under the new software, we have the ability to make the different codes work, and so that it will generate this information, what they call in the world today dashboards. You'll just be able to go in there and click, say, I want this data, I want this data, instead of going through our IT department and asking them to do a query, which is an old-fashioned way of pulling stuff out of software.
Right, so I guess we did that this year. So 2017 going forward, we're gonna have an annual sort of number on that. We can't really do it backwards for going back for a couple of reasons, right? One, we weren't doing these quote-unquote shadow assessments of properties that were...
Oh, we could, but I think my deputy assessor said, Steve, we're not normally spending this kind of time going backwards in time and doing this data, but we could go back further than 15. When I asked for this data, I thought that was a good starting point to go backwards. The PFM study does have, they came into our offices, obviously before I was there, and actually had our office at that time pull that data for the performance management group. I don't know if you were, so he wasn't the one, but we have an IT guy in our office, and he would have pulled that data for that report. But I know that they'd spent a couple of weeks working on that.
But the good news is, after, I guess, many years of sort of speculation on how much tax abatement actually costs the city and costs the school district, we really will know very precisely each year sort of what percentage of revenue is foregone because of that. And if we keep doing these projections, we'll also know, previously tax abated properties, what they're now contributing as they come back onto the tax rolls. So we'll sort of have a much better snapshot and historical comparison going forward each year, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions at this time.
Oh, she is here, okay. Sorry, I didn't see you down there.
Boyd and Boyd at the end.
Yeah, the Boyd caucus. Alderman Bosley.
No questions.
Alderman Oldenburg, any questions? No questions. Okay. Yeah, and you are working, we started trying to liaison a little bit with Angie Banks, the CFO over at the school system. I know Gerard and she has been meeting, and we're sharing this data with them, are we not?
I have not sent, the mayor's office has this data. They were actually fairly aware of this trend that in 17 they were comfortable that more came off of tax abatement than went in. So from the mayor's office and the other policy, SLDC, they all have this, and we'll go ahead. Paul Payne has this information, just to give him an idea as he does the future city budgets. And then we will get these to the other taxing entities, because each of them do have a vested interest in knowing, so that as they set their budgets going forward, they know what's coming.
This has been a problem for the library, I know, for the schools, you know, a number of groups, and so this is a big step forward. Going forward, will you be able to go ahead and eventually track, you know, property like use, retail versus office versus warehouse versus?
When we code it in under the new system, since we're doing two things, you have commercial and residential, and so our selections of when we enter, if you just think of, I'm trying to think of what the common, like, if you wanted to go in, it's going to have the address, square footage, all of the relevant factors of the property. It would have the use. We haven't gotten that far in setting up the base fields for the real estate, but that would be, I mean, in my mind, relevant from a valuation, whether it's retail, office, or warehouse, because they all have different capitalization rates and models for doing the valuation, so we would have to have that data. The key thing is being able to run a report will be so much easier, because you'll be able to go in and say, I want all retail properties in this community or whatever.
I guess where I'm going with this is I could envision a time as we get better, our hands better on this, we can start, you know, targeting the amount of incentives we have with, you know, instead of just everything, just kind of targeting a certain dollar amount, and then we can even split that off and say, okay, well, our city is under retailed in this area, so we want to go ahead and provide incentives for our retail in certain zip codes, or so we can begin thinking about potentially getting much more constructive or strategic in our use of these things. And if we ever got really clever, we could end up understanding market demand in different property types, and you know, for those property types where we're underserved, so we'd have a very low substitution rate, we could end up perhaps providing greater incentives for those.
Well, the data is there, but what you will see, and I've seen, like at the city of Chicago, they have a TIF overlay map. So that when we have the digital parcel mapping, since we're feeding from the other software all of the data into each parcel, you would be able to do a map of all retail in the city of St. Louis. You know, I can code it red or orange on the map. So when we have this system up and running, the data is there. It's being able to quantify it and to put it in a fashion that you can analyze either visually or statistically. But to what you're saying is you'll be able to put it on the map. We'll be able to pull the data, show you visually that, and you know, the Charlotte neighborhood's very little retail. South Grand a lot, or whatever the case might be, but you'll be able to visualize these different things. You'll be able to visualize tax abatements and TIF parcels. And it will give the people easier access for analysis over at SLDC, everybody else, because it will be easier to demonstrate the purposes of what we're doing.
Great. Alderman, I can't tell you how much I'm excited about this, where this is going to take us. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Our next item on the agenda. Okay, just let me know when you're ready. Part of what our focus is as the HUD's committee, particularly with economic development, much of our effort, I think, should be devoted to how to increase our taxing base. In other words, how to increase revenue without increasing taxes. And the creative use of our tools, which are things like transportation and zoning, are the tools that we use to go ahead and create something unique as far as value goes. And we're fortunate to have on our committee the head of the Transportation and Commerce, Alderwoman Davis, and I know they're working on a couple transportation things, and we thought we'd go ahead and provide you a couple minutes, Alderwoman, if you want to give us a bit of an update on some things you're working on?
Yes, sir. Do you need me to go up there or stay?
If you want to just make it informal, or
I'd
that's
like to
fine.
make it informal if you don't mind. Most of our board members have heard this, but I would like to go over it again just so that we can have it on the record for this committee that we reviewed the policies that we're looking for. So I did take time to get additional copies in case people don't remember. Last Friday, we, well, let me start from the beginning. We've had a lot of major concern in the last 2 to 3 months, most especially, where we talked about privatization of the airport. I'll talk about that topic first, and then I'll go on to Metro. We have in process as we speak now the opportunity to look at privatization of our airport, but not to sell it. To clarify, just every time and every opportunity I have, we cannot sell our airport. So looking at privatization and/or some people call it outsourcing, there's been a process in place that had members appointed to a committee by the mayor's office, as well as a representative from the Board of Aldermen and a representative from the comptroller's office. In that process, they were evaluating to select a team that would actually do this operation for us. Many people say, why can't you just do it yourself? Well, I'll be the first one to say that we cannot afford that kind of time from the day-to-day employees to look at that process. It is a very, very complicated process. It has the time frame of as long as maybe 2 years to accomplish that. And if you look at that and you take 2 years out of the everyday 8-hour-a-day employees' work, you are going to suffer. The airport will suffer. So I do understand why you hire a team to do that for you. I've been a part of those processes before in other entities, and so that part I do understand. What I didn't understand was why we had not been included in the process as representatives of the Board of Aldermen, a representative from the Airport Commission. I didn't understand why those people were not involved. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to get past that, and before we have a contract signed, we now have some things in place where we can be a part of the process for the future. We also can look at that contract before it's the actual contract is signed to know what the expectations will be, how they will present that information not only to us but to the public, and also how we can make sure that as the future we have what we need in order to make a sound decision. So resolution number 220 was passed out of the Board of Aldermen last Friday, and most of the information in it is referring to that process. And one of the things that I felt was really important after talking to members of my committee and other alderpersons was how was the public going to be involved? How are they going to be able to see the information that's being collected? And in this resolution, we have determined that it is important that not only do we have a process in place that allows the public to look at this committee process and how it moves forward and how the expiration moves forward, as many documents that are legally, that we can legally make available to the public. And that's another thing that I'm having trouble with. I'm having trouble with information being put out to the public that the public can see everything, because no, you can't. We are in contractual situations with airlines and other commercial tenants and many other kinds of legal documents that will not be public and should not be public. You cannot run any business legally and show every document that you are in a contractual relationship with. It just doesn't happen anywhere for any reason. And so there will be many things that you won't need to see, or we legally cannot show you. The other part to this too is telling the public, as we move forward, biased information, I'll put it that way. I had 2 neighborhood meetings last night that I had to go through this process with, and I thought it was so unfair because they were so confused by the information that had been put out on social media, and it's just not fair. I said that Friday, I'll continue to say it. When you are so irresponsible as an elected official to put misinformation out and confuse your public, you are not serving them well. So I wanted to clear this up as much as I could in this resolution to explain what we cannot do, and also explain how we plan to do our due diligence in providing as much information as possible. I've also requested that if it's not me, a member of my transportation committee is involved more intimately in this process. Also, that there's a reporting system that's put in place that has a minimum reporting time frame of every 60 days, and that should be done to the Airport Commission as well as the Transportation Commission, Transportation Committee here. And as we all know, every committee at the Board of Aldermen is a committee of the whole. So any of the alderpersons that would like to come to those committee meetings can come and gather information as they feel they need. We also know that the process has a lot of concern for the unions, and those people who have jobs currently at the airport are concerned. Clarity is more important than anything else. And as all of us know, when you have a binding union contract, you must abide by that contract until it is time for renegotiation, and then you negotiate again. No one can walk in to any new system and just abolish those contracts. That does not happen. It will not happen, and we will make sure that it doesn't happen. So we don't need to have people who have to come to work every day and be stressed out and concerned like that, because it doesn't take place. And we know that, and we should not alarm people that way. Well, this process, again, as I said, we do not have a contract signed yet for the group that was chosen to do this exploration. That contract has to go to E&A for a vote. If we don't get 2 votes at E&A, the process ends. At any point in time when it's required for a vote to continue to move the process at the Board of Aldermen, at the Transportation Committee, at the Airport Commission, all those entities must have a majority vote. If we get to a final place after the exploration is done, an RFQ has been posed and an RFP has been put out, and you have made a decision that you get that far, again, all those entities plus those airline providers, 65% of them must agree, and the FAA must agree. So you have too many checkpoints in this process. There is no one entity that can make the decision. There are too many people involved, too many responsibilities according to our ordinance and charters that require votes from those entities. So the clarity needed to be there. I hope that Resolution 220 puts some of the clarity there, but it also says too that we, at any point in time, as the Board of Aldermen, need to speak up but in a responsible way, not in a way just to cause frenzy. I hope that if anybody still has any questions about where we are now, that we can answer those today. I like talking about things in a committee process because it allows the public to hear it and see it for themselves versus getting 10 or 12 words on a Twitter that gives them information about what's going on. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Alderwoman. The idea is that we'll kind of use these, not necessarily, that's obviously the work of your committee. I just,
Yes,
you know,
sir.
as we have different updates on Metro or other transportation initiatives,
Right.
I think it's important for the committee to understand those. Next, we have some business from the Alderman from the 24th. He and I have discussed this a fair amount before today's meeting. This is regarding the incentive for the 300 South Broadway redevelopment effort that we passed at the full board last week. The Alderman from the 24th and I think, agree about many aspects of that project. I guess our perhaps largest or significant disagreement would be on the importance, I feel, that we provide a certain predictability to a developer at the beginning of the process, that if we encourage them to proceed with it and they spend money and time on it, that we in fact grant them incentives. One of the weaknesses we had with our resolution was the lack of specificity about what was an exceptional project or what wasn't, and so I think it's incumbent on us to clearly communicate what our preferences are to SLDC so that they don't inappropriately encourage somebody to move forward with a project that is inconsistent with what our shared vision should be. And so I think the Alderman from the 24th, I'm sorry, I'm kind of doing his preamble. Alderman, why don't you go ahead and talk instead of me talking? It's your letter.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yeah, this letter, the intent of this letter is that it comes from the HUD's committee. It goes to SLDC and I think also Downtown Inc. It is related to Board Bill 250 and the project at 300 South Broadway, but I don't want to rehash the whole debate about that project. Hopefully this is sort of looking forward to future projects downtown. So I think the difficulty with Board Bill 250 and 300 South Broadway project is summarized in the letter. Sort of 2 points, 2 major points. One related to Resolution 33, which came out of this committee and is related to incentive reform, and the other to a land use plan for downtown St. Louis. So the first part related to Resolution 33, specifically point 10 in Resolution 33, which I guess I'll read because it's short. Tax abatement length and percentage will be based on the MVA, except for exceptional projects or low-income housing tax credit projects. The city will approve shorter tax abatements with lower percentage of abatement in higher market value areas as determined by the MVA. So in my opinion, we didn't necessarily comply with the resolution for the 300 South Broadway project because it's a 20-year tax abatement, although it is it's not at 100%, of course. So in this letter, we request from SLDC that we state a limit for high-rise projects downtown of 95% for years 1 through 10 and 75% for years 11 through 15. We do have some history now, at least in the Central West End, of high-rise or mid-rise apartment projects from the last decade. Most of those had either 10-year tax abatements or 15-year tax abatements at a reduced percentage. So we're even extending a little bit more for downtown within this letter because the new construction market in downtown is less tested than in the Central West End. The second ask within the letter is more of an ask to Downtown Inc., and we've discussed this with the Alderman from the 7th already, and it's that Downtown Inc. develop a land use plan for downtown that could look like a form-based code. It could also, I think, just look like an assessment of the existing properties downtown and a plan for which ones should probably not be demolished under anything but the most exceptional circumstances and which ones can be. I think it's well within the capacity of Downtown Inc. to do that. And I think that prevents the Preservation Board, this committee, the general public from having to one by one sort of fight these preservation and demolition battles if the market for new construction downtown improves. It'd be nice to just sort of have an informed plan and discussion about that once. And I think if many people could see, look, 95% of the buildings downtown we're going to provide some protection to, and the remaining 5% are sort of available for development, that provide a framework that I think the public would be comfortable with, and I think would be in the best interest of building the best built environment downtown and the most predictable development environment as well. So those are the asks within the letter. It'd be great if members of the committee would sign the letter and we could send it off, and I can entertain any questions. Thank you.
I'd like to just, before we kick it off to the committee, just voice my support for the letter. As I said, I supported the project because I felt that there was a encouragement given at the beginning where we had a developer go out and spend a considerable amount of time and effort doing this. My belief is that all of these things are judgment calls, and it's very easy for us to go ahead and have different opinions about which projects we should or shouldn't support. I think we're getting to the point where we understand that retailing is going to be a different, profile than a residential building is going to be different than office. A number of the things about that project concerned me. One was the lack of a land use plan. We talk here in the committee, zoning is an important tool that we use to create value. It gives people the predictability of what's coming, and all that's important. That doesn't exist downtown. Additionally, we find ourselves in this awkward position of actually providing incentives for a building to get torn down, and the state provides incentives for it to be restored. So we have a situation kind of like the federal government that has advertising to stop people from smoking, and then they're providing tobacco incentives for tobacco farmers to grow tobacco. So, on one hand, we have the state that's providing incentives to save older buildings, and then we have the city incentivizing somebody to tear one down. I think a land use plan for downtown would really go a long way. I'm not necessarily, and I could even see doing that at some point if there was, this starts getting so subtle, but if you actually have an end user who's going to bring jobs downtown, and you're not necessarily letting, in essence, what is somebody speculating with an empty building to tear down a vacant building is one thing. It's a much different thing if somebody comes in and they're the end user and they got the jobs and they're going to say, we need this for this reason. There are lots of other places downtown conceivably where that building could have gone up, and that's kind of my personal feeling about this. But I don't want to dominate the conversation here. Let's go ahead and throw this open. Alderman Kennedy stepped out for a minute. Alderman Boyd, do you have any comments on the letter or observations you'd like to share?
I'd just like to say I appreciate it, and I would like to sign on to it.
Thank you.
I lost my cheat sheet here. Can I steal one of yours? Yep. Alderwoman Davis.
The intent of the letter is okay, but unfortunately, all the knowledge that needs to be shared has not been shared about what is going on with Downtown Inc. And I'm not sure how much the alderperson from the 7th Ward has shared, but there is an Economic Development Committee that is looking at land use, who has concerns about what buildings are being, not only the zoning problems that we have in the downtown area, but also looking at all the empty buildings that we have and looking at use for them. And that committee also includes the executive director of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, who attends as well, and has a lot of input on behalf of the heavily residential part of downtown. And it even goes beyond just the investment parts. They're also concerned about the safety and beautification of the downtown area, including all the graffiti and a number of things. And so I think part of what needs to happen is that those efforts need to be blended better with the City of St. Louis, the Economic Development Department, as well as having some regular reporting processes to this committee, and also getting up to speed on where they are at this point as well. This particular property here has so many different issues, and I do understand all the concerns from the fact that St. Louis Community College wanted to sell their building, needed to sell the building. The fact that even though people wanted to designate it as a historic building, it was not a historic building. Making assumptions that something could happen just because you want it to happen. When you're building a building like that, the architectural design is critical. And so I know there was a lot of talk back and forth about some things that have been suggested. So for me, I am going to, I'm going to sign off on the letter because I do support the efforts that need to take place in the future, but I still support this project and its need for completion. But again, the problem we have here is that we don't have systems working together as they should. And I'm hoping that that can get better. I do know that the Downtown Neighborhood Association has now created a planning and zoning committee for residents to have input. I'm not sure how much that is really going to take this process any further than it's going to go, but I know if nothing else, a strong entity like I still call it Downtown Partnership, but that entity is so strong, has so many large investors for our city and committed investors to our city, that we should be working very closely with them to help get this process in place.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman. Alderman from the 7th, hopefully you realize we're not picking on you today.
No, it's fine. I'm used to it at this point. No, Alderman, thank you for your time on this. You know, as I said last week on the floor, and I think we touched on it a little bit in committee, in particular the land use plan, I'm fully supportive of this, and I think what this letter does is send a clear message to, frankly, it helps with Downtown Inc. I expressed at the last SID meeting the need to move forward with the form-based code. A couple months ago, we talked about it, and I think there's, you know, it was tried several years ago prior to my time as alderman. They spent some money and explored the process of a form-based code, and ultimately, I don't know, ran into all sorts of roadblocks, some of which I think were put up by the city. So what this does is send a clear message that we want downtown's, you know, planning district, Downtown St. Louis Inc., the organization responsible for kind of overseeing some of downtown, to work with the city and direct the city departments to work with them to make this happen. We've got one, I guess, almost in place over in Alderman Chairman Roddy's area. I think downtown would benefit greatly. It would help minimize situations like we just experienced, which is, you know, whether or not what to do with a building like the existing building at 300 South Broadway, what to do with some of our surface parking lots on the south portion of downtown, and even in the center of some areas of downtown. So I'm supportive. I'm going to sign on to the letter and look forward to working with Downtown St. Louis Inc. and the city to get a real land use plan in place.
Great, thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No question.
Alderman Bosley.
I don't have any questions, but I do support the letter.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Yeah, just a real quick question. Thank you, Alderman. What's the reasoning or the driver behind the 10% below the level of the most recently awarded incentive, similar project. I'm just skipping down to the,
Yeah, I think,
the last paragraph here.
I think the intent there is incentives are utilized partially to make projects happen, but also partially to create a market that requires fewer incentives. So if there was, you know, after 10 medium or high-rise market rate buildings in the Central West End have been constructed, I think it makes sense to try to ramp down the incentive over time, not keep hitting the same level. As you've proven, there's a market for that type of property. So I think that's the intent of that statement. Keep in mind, this is not even a resolution. This is a letter, sort of an addendum to a resolution with an ask for SLDC to pursue that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to say that one of my goals is to try to eliminate as much confusion about this stuff. And one of the problems we had with the resolution that was passed is the level of ambiguity. We can't be mad at people if we don't tell them what we expect. And I think this letter helps tell them what we expect. I would hope, and we can probably talk about this offline, but I would like to think that we had kind of left the resolution with the expectation that we were going to get it back with some hard ceilings tied to property types and zones that would make less ambiguity, and we, you know, I'm still hoping for that. In the interim, our executive director stepped out, but if they think that they're going to head and start getting, you know, these, I think we had some less than what was the term that they used in the resolution, Alderman, for special projects that were exceptional or something like that? It's
Catalytic,
so,
maybe?
Yeah, so ambiguous that it's hard to, you know, it's non-defined, and I think what we're going to need to ask, and I don't know if is Dale here or Linda maybe, if we have projects like that, you know, that SLDC is working on anywhere in the city and they think that they're going to get pushback from the committee, I would strongly encourage them to bring that to us earlier, and if we need to, we'll go in private session, or else they can meet one-on-one. But there's Otis. I was just saying, you know, the exceptional project or the catalytic projects, everybody's, you know, one person's creek is another person's river, or whatever the old saying is. If you have something like that, I think it's very important for us, you know, that if you're going to go ahead and start bumping up against the ceilings that we've tried to establish in the letter, that we have some conversation about that before somebody spends a year and $500,000 trying to bring a project to fruition. And that's all I would ask. Okay, I don't think we need to necessarily take a vote on this. Alderman, are you comfortable with us just
Absolutely.
with the presentation we made?
Okay,
today?
thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we have several board bills here. We are waiting for, the president is here. Okay. Mr. President, you want to step up and address your board bill? Board bill number 245.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Board Bill 245 is a board bill that would call for the St. Louis Development Corporation to complete a city economic growth strategy report on an annual basis. This board bill came about due to a number of meetings I had with our new financial analyst once he started, when we began to discuss the city's credit rating and what types of things impact the city's credit ratings in terms of a positive effect and a negative effect. And it turns out that one of the major components of that is the city having on record an agreed to city economic growth strategy plan, right? And this bill calls for that plan. There's 5 sections in the bill that we will discuss. There are a couple of amendments that I'm going to offer up today for the bill. One of the amendments will extend the timeline from July 1 for the report being required to be filed, submitted by SLDC to August 1. That gives them 30 days at the end of the fiscal year to present us with the report. The other amendment that we will introduce today is one that provides for additional transparency so that then the bill would, the final report would be published online, and it also will require some community hearings outside of City Hall to solicit community input and community involvement. I would love to just start by having Gerard come up and talk to the board about the importance of the report and how it can help the city of St. Louis, and also some components within the bill itself. Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. So the report, first let's discuss the reasoning for the report, the importance of the report. There's really 4 key reasons for this report and how it will help the city. The first reason is addressing the lack of revenue growth of the city. The city, ENA, the budget director, does an effective job of managing our budget as it relates to cutting costs when necessary and managing shortfalls. Where we really have struggled over the years is growing top-line growth without raising taxes. And so what this report really will address is how do we raise our revenue without raising taxes? And a lot of that is going to be driving economic growth within the city. You know, how do we drive revenue by not raising taxes? A lot of it will look at population growth, a lot of it will look at increasing economic activity around the city. The second area, which is important for us, is regional competition. As we all know, there's a lot of talk in the media about us moving to some type of regional structure. But even within a regional structure, we're still going to have to compete, right? And we want to define how we compete within the region. You know, long term, what will be the office center for the region? Will it be West County and downtown, or will it be West County and Clayton, or will it be downtown? What will retail be centered in the region? Right now, St. Louis County really dominates the retail segment of the region. St. Louis County generates more sales tax revenue per capita than LA County. And that's not generated by the citizens of LA or St. Louis County, it's generated by everyone from the region shopping in St. Louis County. And so whether it be Illinois, the city, they attract citizens from around the region to shop in the county. That's a big chunk of their economic strategy. So we have to figure out, from a competitive standpoint, what's our place in the region? How are we going to generate revenue? How are we going to be self-sufficient? Will it be entertainment? Will it be growing our population in certain segments of the city? Will it be developing certain aspects of retail? Will it be developing an industrial business, which we've seen in Hazelwood? The third component, the third important portion of reason why we're doing this is really to develop on an annual basis an economic and demographic overview of the city, right? And we've talked about this in previous presentations, but really developing an overview from an economic standpoint where we are as a city and where our growth is. What's our GDP? What's our average household income? What's our poverty rate? How is that different from North St. Louis versus South St. Louis versus the Central Corridor? How is that changing over time? And then also these indicators will be the performance measures. So the final and most important component is this report will be required to be updated and presented to Ways and Means and to this committee on an annual basis. And so the SLDC would report based using these economic performance and demographic performance measures, really discuss how the plan is impacting the city, right? And let's talk a little bit about the plan. The plan is broken into several components. The first component is a demographic overview. So breaking the city down in major components, North St. Louis, Central Corridor, South St. Louis, really giving a demographic overview of what those areas of the city look like. Economic overview, looking at those individual segments and talking about what each segment looks like from an economic standpoint. What's the household income in North St. Louis versus South St. Louis versus the Central Corridor? What's the difference between downtown, midtown, and Central West End? How has that changed over time? And then finally, the actual plan itself, which is the most important part. you know, there've been, obviously, the partnership has done a regional plan, and that plan kind of looks at the region from 35,000 feet. But this plan would really almost really get into the weeds, right? We talked about a land use plan for downtown St. Louis, but, you know, we as a region, we as a city have to decide what is the future of downtown St. Louis. Will downtown St. Louis remain as primarily an office market, or will it transition to more of a residential market, which is what we've seen in a lot of downtown areas across the country? So before we even get to be able to do a land use plan, we need to determine what's the future of downtown. You know, will downtown grow? And, you know, right now downtown has approximately 10,000 residents. In 20 years, we'll have 50,000 residents and be more of a residential neighborhood with retail versus an office market. And what's the financial, most importantly, what's the final impact of that on the city? So, and then we obviously North St. Louis, we need to really determine what is the future of North St. Louis. You know, what do we want North St. Louis to look like in the future? And what are we going to do to make that happen, right? As you know, we traditionally have followed a very passive strategy in the city as far as economic development. And to grow North St. Louis, we're going to have more of an aggressive strategy, what you've kind of seen the county implement in North County. And so for us to change the dynamic in North St. Louis and some of the poor neighborhoods in South St. Louis, we're going to have to take more of an active strategy, and the plan will discuss that. And then finally, what I discussed, implementation and performance. You know, on an annual basis, this plan will be updated. This will be a living document. They'll be accountable to Ways and Means and to this committee about the performance and also impact, right? We'll be able on a year-to-year basis see the changes that this plan is implemented and also the hurdles that we've run into over the year.
Alderman, from the 16th, you may end up having your job for our committee kind of made obsolete here. How did you want to proceed? I presume you have communicated with SLDC. Did you want someone from that organization to talk as well, or did you want us to go through the committee and ask questions, or?
Either way, yes, I have communicated with SLDC. I've been talking to Otis. And matter of fact, on amendments 2 and 3, we just had a conversation. Instead of August 1st, he would love to have that be September 1st because that gives them a little more time to collect all of the granular data from all of the various different departments across the city. So he said if they get all of that data, they would be able to meet a September 1st deadline. So I agree to that. I think that if we want to make sure that they have the appropriate time to be able to get everything done, we would change amendments 2 and 3 from July 1 to September 1. Yeah, both of them, July 1 to September 1.
Before we open it up to committee, we've been here for a long time. I'm trying to get a little better with our time. And Mr. Executive Director, did you have anything that you'd like to say with regard to this ordinance? I presume since you're here, you're in support of it, or?
Thank you. I'm Otis Williams. Well, you guys know me. I am in support of the bill. But I would like to acknowledge the fact that this is something that we really wanted to get done for a long time, and we have not been able to get it done because of resources. And so, but the bill here requires us to get it done with internal staff. And so, I'm a little concerned about the effort that it will require for us to get it all done, given the internal staff that we have. But because we truly do need to get this underway, I'll be talking to the president and others about ways for us to augment what we have in place to try and make sure we get it done. But we're committed to providing the report as directed.
All right. Okay.
Can I make one comment about that?
Sure.
We've, myself and Tom Shepard have had some initial conversations with Accenture, the global consulting company, with their managing partner for the Midwestern region, and they have offered some of their free of charge services to assist us in the plan. They've also started, on our behalf, to reach out to some of the partners in the area, particularly Washington University, and they have a strong interest in helping us as well with the plan. So I think what this plan will allow us to do is really kind of bring in some of our partners, kind of what Alderwoman Davis talked about, of really bringing together all our partners to work together to help us develop this plan. We realize that this obviously is a stretch for St. Louis Development Corp., but there are partners that want to contribute to this and help us because, you know, they have a vested interest in the city and want to see the city grow as well. So we are going to work with.
This would be for September 1st of next year, so we're talking a year and a half from now. Okay.
So we do realize the stretch that, you know, the resource stretch this will provide St. Louis Development Corp., and we're working to address that.
And Otis, you had talked about having some sort of, like, maybe not economic development plan, but like a report for us.
Yes, well, our intent was to do an RFP to acquire a consultant to essentially do an economic development plan for the city. I'm looking at this particular bill essentially is part and parcel to doing some of those same things. I was formalizing the process to try and ensure that we had a lot of public engagement in that process of setting those goals. So that was my intent, to try and ensure that we had public engagement throughout all of the communities as we establish those goals going forward. I'm looking at this as being a report on what we are doing, and then trying to establish, take those goals and try and report back to this body and to the board and to the citizens.
But we had talked about perhaps having a report that would show us, you know, the amount of construction, the
Correct.
Incentives and all that. And I think we were talking about that being available this year. It wouldn't be a
right. As you know, we are working toward enhancing the data that we have, and we are, I guess, just recently put together a small document to talk about some of the things that we have been collecting. But be happy to report back to this body at your next committee meeting on some of the things that we are currently doing.
Okay, but you think we'll have something by July of this year for that report?
A selected amount of information.
Okay.
Not all of that is outlined.
Obviously not everything that's in this, but it would at least show
Right.
us the direction you're going.
Right.
And you think
But I would like to also make that, maybe if we can, again, is the ability to collect information at the end of the fiscal year, and so if we could make that out into August 30th or September 1, that would be great.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, let's go through the committee now. If there's, is there anyone signed up to speak on this?
No, I don't see anybody.
What board bill number is this? 245? No speakers on board bill number 245. Let's go through, ask questions, and then we'll kind of take care of the housekeeping, get the amendments before us and so forth. Alderman Kennedy is not currently present. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Yes, I have a question for Otis.
Yes, sir.
So Otis, how much funding do you think is going to require to do this? And I know you've already been talking about doing an RFP yourself, and this may complement or accelerate this production. But as far as funding, how much do you think?
Well, I have not looked directly at what the actual cost might be, but my original intent was to try and garner together $500,000 to do that economic development plan. But I have not looked at what the cost would be to add additional staff. What we're talking about here, just listening to what Gerard is describing of citizen augmentation or university augmentation. But if we also needed just say if I had 2 additional staff members that were just committed to doing this kind of stuff, then we're easily talking another $150,000 a year.
And the $150,000 just if you do it in-house and
I was doing it
maybe
in-house.
Working with some volunteers.
Right.
But a professional team of experts, about $500,000.
Right.
Okay, thanks. My next question is for Gerard. I know using outside resources and universities, that's something I oftentimes talk about. Matter of fact, Otis and I had a conversation with the CoLab experience a couple weeks ago, and I kind of brought that up. But realistically, pulling all of that together, having somebody manage that particular process, how much time would it take, and how many additional full-time people do you see we needing to accomplish that? And will it be able to be realistically accomplished within this time frame?
I do think it would be able to accomplish in this time frame. You have to kind of look at the report kind of two phases, right? The first report is going to be the most difficult one because it's a new process. And so that's when we're going to have to pull in resources from the universities and our surrounding partners. But once we learn how to do the report and learn how to pull the data, then it becomes then it's really just, for all intents and purposes, just updating the report based on market conditions for that ongoing year. So I would look at it in two phases. I would say realistically, once we, I would think the majority of staff would have to be added that first year to get that first report done. But after that, you won't need as many staff because you'll know the process. You'll know how to pull the data, right? You won't be recreating the wheel.
Right. I want to make sure we're walking down the same street with SLDC and what the expectation from this board bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I understand, Otis' outlook is that there's a need for this big comprehensive a comprehensive plan on how we do development and put this whole economic development strategy in place. And then what I'm hearing this board bill is going to do is look at data and provide a report that would, I guess, give us a roadmap to accomplish what he wants to accomplish.
What this board bill really focuses in on is on growth. Really.
Okay.
Growth. How are we going to grow the revenue line? If you look at this, if you look at kind of our income statement, it's going to focus in on how do we use economic development to grow our revenue, right? That's where we've seen, issues as far as the city's balance sheet or income statement is. It's really that our top line revenue is not growing with the exception of when we raise taxes. And as you know, we have one of the highest tax rates in the region, so our ability to raise taxes is somewhat limited. And so what this will really focus in on is really looking at the assets of the city, the opportunities in the marketplace, and how can we use those opportunities to grow our revenue through economic development.
So once this product is produced, August 30th, September 1st, or whenever, is it the expectation that then SLDC takes that and start looking at how we could, better use our incentives and?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, they're going to make the way I envision it is they will make recommendations to both this committee and to Ways and Means about changes we may need to make in public policy, things they can do themselves without legislation, and then walk us through how those changes will impact our revenue. We will then implement, with the support of the board, implement those changes. And then on a yearly basis, they will then come back and present what happened over the year, what was the impact, what were the successes, what were the hurdles, how they're changing the plan going forward.
Yeah, I'm liking this process. I think it's a good process. I'm supportive of it. I just want to make sure that our expectation of SLDC with trying to get this big economic development strategy in place, that it's all actually working together. So I'm just thinking in my head, does Otis wait until this is produced and then move forward? Or?
Otis is producing it.
So this is a work in progress. And so one of the things that we have already started to do, as you know, with your direction, we've already moved down the road of the incentive reform and looking at data. We're gathering data. We are working also in the IT technology area where we want to be able to ensure that we can manage the data. And so right now everything goes. You looked at the old systems that the assessor, you talked about that earlier. What we're trying to do is ensure that we have the framework in place so that we can manage all the data that we currently have. And so right now, in economic development, we use Excel spreadsheets for the most part. And so what we need to do is to have a workable database management system that is integrated with all of the other city systems as well. So in that regard, we are working with the new CIO and future the new CTO that in the IT.
I'm sorry, what's
the
the CIO
the
and
Chief
the
Information Officer, the person that's in charge of the internal IT network and systems in the city, and then the Chief Technology Officer, the person that's going to be working, I call it the external piece of this, to bring on new technologies and also look at all of the what I call smart city technologies that we bring to the city. So we're working that component as well, but part of that is understanding what technical management systems we need, but we know what kind of data we need to be watching and managing, and so we're in the process of doing that, just using current technology that we have, but we hope to move to a different platform in the near future.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Alderwoman Davis, questions?
Well, first let me say hooray for everybody. We finally getting there talking about it. We're going to try to accomplish this goal. One of the things I wanted to ask our financial analysts, when we've talked about economic growth, we've never talked about the planning part of the land use plan. That's what we never talk about. And so we know we have all this available land. We know that we have the opportunity to have a huge economic growth if we know where we're going, know where to go find what we need, then the city can grow and the city can profit. So that is what we expect the outcomes to be from this process.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I support it 100%. I know it's going to be difficult for our city functions to get up to 100% speed, and that's the only question I have in this. Are we giving ourselves enough time to put everything in place and get the partners that we need to make this successful? And
Yeah, we're given a year. This first thing will not be required for a year and a half. So they have a year and a half to get things in place. And I think that that's a significant amount of time. Here's the subtleties and the difference in what we're doing here by creating a process, an adopted process at the Board of Aldermen that would require an economic growth plan be in place and adopted. Is imagine, if you will, if you're a rating agency and the rating agency is going to, let's assume you're going to rate a business, right? If you want to invest in that business or not, and that business is selling widgets, but the sale of widgets are on decline. But that's all that business will give you. It says, I'm selling widgets. It does not tell you that, guess what, I'm going to move to a different version of widgets that are on the increase, right? So when we're presenting to the rating agencies, it's important for them to understand how we are going to begin to grow our economy. And that's going to impact our credit rating. We all benefit from a better credit rating. But right now, they don't really have much to rate us on except for, a lot of our debt.
okay, my last concern is when we talk about the various components here, one of the things that I guess when you talk about implementation and performance update, it's not as clear as I probably need it to be, because it just basically says that we're going to make some recommendations, but who is going to be responsible for the recommendations?
St. Louis Development.
St. Louis Development. Okay.
They write the plan.
They write the
And
plan.
make the recommendations.
Okay.
and they would present that to both HUDs and Ways and Means.
Okay. Just in clarity for me, because we've never had a planning department and our neighborhoods, or rather our wards, have not had the opportunity to plan, and then those plans were a part of a whole city process, we have a long way to go. I think only the 5th Ward and the 19th Ward have official adopted plans with the city of St. Louis. The 19th Ward plan took $1.5 million, almost 2 years of getting analysis, doing public engagement, all of that. 7 working committees, volunteers from WashU, St. Louis University, 2 civil engineering teams that volunteered their time and energy, aside from spending $1.5 million on it. So no one understands that this is complicated. This requires a lot of due diligence on many levels, but it's so needed, and we're so far behind in not having it. And so I just applaud the fact that we are beginning the process, that we're all on board for it. And anything you need me to do, I'll be there with you 100%, because this has to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman from the 7th?
No questions.
Alderman from the 24th?
No questions.
Alderwoman from the 2nd? 27th, I'm sorry. 27th.
You're a new ward now.
I should know better, I'm sorry.
Forgive me. I'm excited about this. The question that I have, because I'm like Alderwoman Davis, with the engagement of the community, I'm real clear that that has to be the priority. But do you know about when that could start? Because I keep hearing it's a long process.
Yeah. I have an amendment. That's one of the amendments that's calling for the community engagement piece. So we can discuss that amendment, and I'm open to any changes within that amendment that you all would like to see. So we can offer up whatever type of amendment you want to add to make sure that there is transparency and community engagement. So those are the 2 pieces that's in one of the amendments that we're going to introduce today.
Thank you. And I support it. I just wanted to make sure I was clear.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, let's start by going ahead and having a motion for Board Bill 240. Oh, I apologize.
No worries.
Alderman from the
Just a
16th.
couple
I'm
quick
sorry.
questions. Not at all, not at all. It's been a long morning, it's fine. Gerard or Mr. President, do you guys know, or maybe even someone from SLDC can answer, did they hire an outside firm to help them with this initial review, the partnerships review?
I'm not sure. I'll defer to St. Louis Development.
Do you know if the compilation of this report was done by an outside firm or not? This is.
Oh, development strategies did that.
They did? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then are they part of the annual report as well?
I'm sorry. This is the
Partnership.
yes, the SEDS Company Economic Development Strategy. It was jointly funded by the city and the county.
Okay.
Okay. And
But Development Strategies wrote this?
yes, they were the consultant, and they had several self-consultants that were supportive.
Okay. Great. Great. I mean, I think this is great. I mean, trying to bring this information together and give it some parameters. My question, and maybe it's not a question, but maybe just caution is, Gerard, you and I are working on a lot of things that I think are overlapping here, which is good. So the more we stay in communication, I think is going to be the better. Because I think that we can leverage this board bill and what we're trying to achieve here in the same way that we're trying to evaluate our incentives and create a roadmap for the best use of our incentives, which we talked a little bit about earlier this morning.
Yep.
I'm just a little worried if we don't, I know SLDC is very resource stretched, and I feel like we've given them enough runway with the amendments you've offered today. And I'm glad to hear that you'd say that Accenture might be involved. So having that third-party outside expert, I think, is going to be kind of critical to moving this. It also gives it validity, and that's not a shot against SLDC. There's great economic development practitioners there, but having a third party or another set of eyes on this, I think, is going to be an important part of this process. So I'm happy to be involved and help as well.
And I do agree with you. The data set, as we've discussed, it's important for us to, as a city, to start really compiling data and bringing in, and it's one of the things we don't do a good job of is really gathering economic and demographic data that the entire city can use, right? And so, as we've talked about with performance measures, a lot of the data we're looking at in performance measures can be used across the board.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons that the economic report has an economic and demographic overview, is to kind of formalize that process. So we now have a data set that a lot of different departments can use and build on.
Sure. Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm really stepping on it today. Alderman Bosley, did you have any questions?
Just more, I guess more of a comment. I really appreciate that. This is pretty dope. We always say all the time how we really don't have an economic plan for the entire city as a whole on kind of what we see moving towards the future on how we want the city to look. So I definitely love this. You all have a lot of interesting statistics, and I do want to point something out. I think it's extremely important that we really pay a lot of attention to education, just looking at a lot of the statistics, and we pay attention to the type of individuals that'll be in the city 10 or 15 years from now, because everything we do now is for the advancement, of the city and for the future. Right now we have I think we have a pretty well-built city as far as diversity ethnically. On the north side, on the other part of town, the majority of the people there don't have high school diplomas or degrees in general. So the next 10 years, especially if we're looking at workforce, they won't really have what's necessary to, I think, compete with newer minds coming into the city if we don't really focus on what we can do to start really looking at what's going on as far as educational with these schools that are on the north side of town. I just really wanted to point that out because that is a really big thing. We talk about gentrification and things like that, but we can bring a lot of economic opportunities to the city, but if we don't have individuals that are talented enough to know what those opportunities look like, or at least not so much as talented enough, if they don't understand them, if we're not educating everyone, as they grow and as the city grows, then I think we will fall into a different type of, the city will look a lot different. And I think it's, I think we are very well versed right now.
No, you're exactly right, Alderman, and Gerard is really itching to answer that question.
Well, one of the things we'll look at as far as the economic strategy is you have to match the strategy with the demographic population. So I'll just use an example. Everyone talks about the growth of Nashville and how Nashville is booming and surpassing us, but what people don't talk about is the most important thing Nashville did is they brought Nissan, right? So, and there's 2 auto plants in and around Nashville that employ individuals that don't have college degrees at a very high level of income, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And so one of the things to look at, particularly with the North St. Louis strategy, is what industries can we bring to St. Louis that fit our workforce? We're not saying we bring an industry in that doesn't fit our workforce and then displace a large number of people. That's not what the strategy is. A true economic strategy looks at the strengths of the city, and that's human capital, right? And you match that against an industry that needs those type of individuals. Light manufacturing is starting to really pick up. If you look at, as a student at Morehouse, I was in Atlanta around the same time that the BMW plant was built in Greenville, South Carolina, so I saw that area grow, and people laughed at Greenville. Like, there's no way this is gonna work. And 25 years later, that's the largest BMW plant in the world, right? And now Boeing produces a 777 in South Carolina. And South Carolina dominates, manufacturing around the country, right? And people laughed at them. You know, you're putting a BMW plant in a cornfield in the middle of South Carolina. Now Charleston Port is one of the fastest growing ports because now both BMW and Mercedes make vehicles in the United States and ship them back to Germany. And they all go out of that port. And so, but they match the economic growth for that area with the population. And so that's a really important part of this strategy, is doing that.
Awesome. And I also want to see what we can look at doing is, you know, kind of making our city, since we have this this plan and we are working, we're planning for the future, kind of not just economically, but what can we do educationally to really make our city like the, you know, one of the leaders in, you know, the United States in producing innovative children and really bringing education to the forefront of being one of our biggest issues in the city, because it is a lot of lack of education. And you know, sometimes, and you know, it's bringing great jobs are good, but even when you bring in good jobs, you know, if those jobs end up shutting down or things like that, people really need to be able to you know, have an educational background. So we definitely want to see what we can do to really kind of push. We got, it says here that 17% of the people in St. Louis have no high school degree, I mean, a high school diploma. And the national average is 14%. So, you know, we just at least want to look at what we can do to not even close that gap, but bring it down tremendously, and really, because all of our schools are deteriorating. You know, we got, I think I have about 4 of them that are falling apart in my ward. One of them almost shut down last year. Some of the schools only have about 150 kids in them. And I think, you know, just collectively as we work on a plan, that's just something we should look at to kind of revitalize the communities, because a lot of kids walk to school, and that's how, you know, we create those communities, by people seeing each other every day, going to class together, coming home, walking down the street, you know, back to your house, coming from school. But just wanted to point that out also. Thank you.
And everything, very good questions. And everything you talked about kind of grows from having a true economic growth strategy in place. Because here's the thing, St. Louis City, we're full of assets, but how are we using those assets? How are they working together to advance our city, right? And we're not making decisions based on that. This plan will begin to put us in alignment and give us the information to begin making those decisions that would leverage our assets, and everybody wins by that. The people living all throughout the city, particularly North St. Louis, because there are a lot of assets in North St. Louis that continues to be overlooked. So I'm excited about having the opportunity to get this in place, and I think it's something that the city needs desperately. We should not be paying the rates that we're paying for money, but we are, because nobody knows where we're going. They don't know that we even have a plan in place to grow further than what we have, what we are now. They think our solution to everything is just to increase tax rates. It's okay, you guys now maxed out on that, what next, right? This begins to outline our assets and say, this is our plan for moving forward, and this is how we're going to grow our economy and grow this city and lead the state. So I'm really excited about the opportunity of getting this thing in place.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm excited also.
If we're done with questions, we'll begin by the chair entertaining a motion that we pass out of committee.
You want to take the amendments up?
Well, I was going to
Or
go
bring it
ahead
in front of us.
and put it before us with that. So if we could, it's been moved. Is there a second? Okay. Now it's properly before us. We have 3 amendments that's been offered. The chair will entertain the motion for the first amendment.
I move we adopt amendment number 1 to Board Bill 245.
It's been moved by the alderman from the 24th, seconded by the alderwoman from the 27th. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd. Aye. Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar. Aye. Alderman Ogilvie.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Aye. Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
President Reed.
Aye.
You have 9 aye votes.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and go to amendment number 2. The chair will entertain a motion on amendment number 2.
I move we adopt Amendment 2 to Board Bill 245.
Been moved. Second. Request for previous roll. Hearing no objections, amendment number 2 is passed. The chair will entertain a motion on amendment number 3.
Move we adopt Amendment 3 to Board Bill 245.
Oh, wow.
It's been moved.
Second.
There's a second. Request for previous roll. Hearing no objection, amendment number 3 is adopted. Now we'll go back to the full board bill, or the underlying board bill, Board Bill number 245 as amended. Chair will entertain a motion that we pass that board, or do we need a new motion? I guess.
I move we pass Board Bill 245 as amended with a do pass recommendation.
Second. Previous roll.
Yeah, I guess we don't really need a motion. All we need to do is take a vote on it. So, no objection to the previous roll, then we'll go ahead and consider that as heard and pass out of committee. Do pass. Congratulations, Mr. President, on getting that out of our committee.
Mr. Chairman.
I want to just thank each and every one of you for the questions and also working to get this passed out of committee today. Right now, if anyone would like to be added as a co-sponsor, please notify the clerk.
I would like to be.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. Mr. Chairman, so we just amended, we had 3 amendments before us?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And now we're done with that board bill. We'll take up board bill number 261. I am not as familiar with these 2 board bills as I should be. I asked just 1 or 2 questions about them to make sure that we had addressed some of the concerns of the previous time that this project was before us. And it's my understanding that we have, in fact, reduced the amount of incentives or tweaked the way that we have done this. So, Bill, if you could kind of walk us through here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Bill Keeling, attorney with Thompson Coburn, representing Fauxpas Partners, LLC, which is the developer of the City Foundry TIF. I'm joined here today by Steve Smith, who is the principal of that, and Amanda Auer, who is their general counsel. To remind the committee, in January of this year, the Board of Aldermen approved Ordinance 70431, which approved the City Foundry TIF redevelopment plan and redevelopment agreement. And the developer launched into looking to implement that plan. That board bill, the original plan had 4 RPAs, redevelopment project areas. So think of it as 4 different chunks. The original board bill only activated the first one, RPA 1. The other 3 were kind of laying there in the background, waiting for future action. Well, the positive response that the developer got to RPA 1 led them to the next step, which was to go back to the TIF Commission to activate RPA 2. But also they had learned from dealing in the marketplace that the original plan that they had presented back in early 2016 needed some tweaking to it. So what you have in front of you is a board bill to amend the original redevelopment plan. And it really makes 5 key changes to it. Number 1, it combines 2 of those original RPAs. So there were 4 originally. What this proposes, number 1's already been taken care of. This combines 3 and 2 into just a new RPA 2. So it kind of simplifies the world. It revises the boundary a little bit between RPA 2 and RPA 1. That's because there were some design issues they came up with, so that's another change that's made. The use has changed. The original use proposed in RPA 2 was residential. It's now been changed to retail and office use. Number 4, the financing plan has been changed to remove tax abatement. So there's no tax abatement in this new RPA 2. It's purely a traditional TIF and traditional TIF financing. And finally, the last thing it'll do is activate RPA 2 so the developer can then move forward with the proposal. Now, you may want to know what will be built. There'll be really 4 different phases of this RPA2. The first thing out of the box will be a new entertainment and restaurant space, about 46,000 square feet, and additional 13,000 square feet of retail. That costs about $27.5 million. The next phase will be 400 parking spaces, a structure for 400 parking spaces. Cost of that's about $14 million. Third phase is a 5-story office building. And then the fourth phase is another 5-story office building. The all-in cost of all these, of phase 2, is about $97 million. The total TIF reimbursement is $17,259,000. This project also uses a SID and a TDD to try to speed along the repayment of the TIF by adding additional tax revenues into the mix. But it does feature a little bit that some money from the SID will be devoted to helping the operation of a transportation program serving the area. So that's provided for in the plan. So that is what's in Board Bill 261. And I can talk a little about 262 also if you wish. They really go hand in hand, or we can wait.
Sure, why don't you go ahead and give us the full overview?
Okay. Board Bill 262 is simply the board bill to authorize a redevelopment agreement between the city and the developer, which will implement the plan I just talked to you about. So that's pretty much it. These board bills, the redevelopment board bill, you know, it's the same thing as what in any redevelopment agreement. Defines what the project is, the time frame in which it's going to be built, how the TDD and the CID will assist in repayment, the total maximum TIF amount and the maximum amount per phase, how obligations will be issued, establishes the special allocation fund, and provides for MBE, WBE participation in the projects.
So do you have a site plan or anything for us in the board bill, or is there any?
I believe Amanda has a site plan,
Okay. And then
which we can,
several of the, anticipating some of the concerns that were raised when we initially passed this project, you know, you said January this year. Was that January of
that's when it
last
finally got signed.
Okay.
Was January of this year.
I was thinking it's probably been a
Began
year.
in 16.
So, one of the issues that was raised initially was the use of tax abatement inside of a TIF. That's not going to happen in this phase, is that correct?
Yes, they have committed not to do it, and I should add that the city budget director raised that concern in conversation with, that was the one issue he had. He was afraid that they would apply to St. Louis University that has a 353 corporation in this area. But to remind the board that there were provisions put in that 353 that do not allow use in either the Armory project or the City Foundry project without the explicit approval of SLDC. Now, if people don't trust SLDC to oversee that, I guess that could be strengthened, but that's kind of a decision that the board can make, or the committee can make.
And then, you know, we talked about percent of subsidy on the initial project. It was fairly high when you added in all the historic tax credits and everything, and substantially lower now, I think.
Yes, substantially lower.
Would you go ahead and kind of walk through the tenants, Alamo?
I'd like to ask Mr. Smith to
Sure.
up and,
Because I know that there's a lot of concern about substitution effect, and would this, you know, take business away from some of the community neighborhoods and stuff? So, go ahead.
Well, I'm Steve Smith, owner of Fopop Partners, developer of City Foundry. So we have executed a lease with Alamo Draft House. That is their first location in the St. Louis region. We do know that they looked at multiple locations in the St. Louis region, but we do have a lease with them contingent on our financing moving forward. You know, the city of St. Louis, as we've looked at this and talked with Alamo, has the Moolah, the High Point, the Chase Park Plaza, and the MX. I think a total of like 10 screens in the entire city of St. Louis. We'll be adding 10 screens at this cinema here.
And then you have, is it Punch Bowl Social, was that?
Punch Bowl Social is not part of the RPA 2.
Okay.
That's part of RPA 1.
Okay, so that was RPA 1, and that is kind of an amusement park for adults, is that?
I call it a Dave and Buster's for millennials.
Okay. So that is, and from a standpoint of, there's not really anything like that in the city.
Yeah, so Punch Bowl Social also does not have a location in the state of Missouri. This is their first location. They do have about a dozen locations nationwide. They're based in Denver. Overall, and listening to the earlier conversation, we are competing, City Foundry and the city of St. Louis, with the region for these national tenants. The three that we announced about 3 weeks ago, Punch Bowl Social, Fassler Hall, and Alamo Draft House, are all new to the St. Louis region, and we were competing with the entire St. Louis region to attract those tenants. Since they are new businesses to the region, those will be all new jobs. We estimate those 3 tenants alone will generate about 400 jobs. Now, those tenants cross over RPA 1 and RPA 2, but I think it reflects that the market is interested in coming into the city of St. Louis if we can compete financially with the county.
Okay. Why don't you walk us through the site plan, then we'll hear from John Ferry on the financials, and then we'll open it up to the committee for questions, if that's okay. Can you tell us what's what on the site plan
Sure.
here?
Let me get, so this is our entire TIF area, including what was originally the 4 RPAs, RPA 1 through 4. The area that's outlined in the light red line is the combination of what was originally RPA 2 and RPA 3. Those are now combined, as Bill outlined. The only remaining RPA is in the lower left corner down here. That's RPA 4, which we are not asking to activate at this time. The balance of the site, the majority of the site, is already the activated RPA 1. So when we first came before this committee, the first RPA was taking the bulk of the infrastructure cost, and we asked for tax abatement and the other things that you've provided for us. With RPA 2, now we're just basically competing with these tenants to bring them to the city of St. Louis and to City Foundry. And so in the red outlined area, you have the Alamo Draft House right here, which we have renderings included. That sits above parking and additional retail. I'll point out that an average Alamo Draft House will do about 10 million in sales, their average location. So that's what we're projecting to happen here. Then we have a 45,000 square foot building here, of which we have 2 parties interested right now, neither of them in St. Louis currently. A parking structure, and then a future 90,000 square foot office building right on Vandevanner Avenue. Both office buildings would have ground floor retail.
Okay. Mr. Ferry, Jonathan, you want to come up, and do you have any financial analysis that you've done for us on this?
It's still morning. Good. Good morning. I'm John Ferry, financial analyst at SLDC. What you guys have before you is the summary report of the financials for this project. Starting at the top, you guys have seen this a number of times now, so we'll just jump right into it. The rates of return for this project, even with the incentives, come in a little bit below the normal range. So this, the analysis indicates that there is need for the incentive. In other words, without the incentive, this project definitely would not happen. I had a pretty long discussion with the developer's financial person as to why why this rate of return was what it was and why they were still doing the project. And essentially, the answer that was given was that there's still a significant amount of sort of broad level infrastructural site work type of work that's going to support later phases. So they're sort of willing to take this, even though this is phase 2, it's still sort of a loss leader in some regards. Not really a loss leader, they're obviously taking a loss, but it's not the rate of return that is sort of typical. But with that said, the revenue to the city on this project is healthy. The city will get almost $2.3 million in net new revenue. That's even after subtracting out the baseline, so existing revenue to the site plus also any expected relocation of jobs has been added into the baseline there. So we estimated that about 30% of the office jobs were already going to be located in the city somewhere. So that's included there for that 10-year period. The school district is going to end up with about $1.6 million over a 10-year period. So it's healthy for both the city and the school district. Over 30 years, it'll generate just under $30 million. Sort of the site requirement, if you will, from the model over a 30-year period is about $21 million, compared to the average commercial property of this size in the city being $7 million. So, so in other words, we're holding this property to a standard that is 3 times higher than the city average, and that is why you'll see the overall score being 3. And this is obviously was one of my older. This still has the fraction instead of the decimal points. It's 3 3/4 stars out of 5, so 3.75 stars, which is good for a passing score. 3.5 is generally what we look for passing. Yeah, so the sources and uses are on the right. There's a $1 million discrepancy, I think because it was somewhere in the acquisition cost or something. Or no, not million, thousand. There's a $1,000 discrepancy for some reason. But it wasn't significant enough to change anything. The substitution effect rates, we've got 25% on the retail sales and 85% on the restaurant sales. The payroll, that's in addition to the 30% that we believe will be sort of relocated from elsewhere in the city. That's 9% where, so that those new retail and restaurant sales will essentially cause 9% of jobs elsewhere to sort of have to be pared back. Probably not necessarily jobs, but maybe like hours and things as sales are relocated from other parts of the city, potentially. I think that pretty much summarizes it. Sorry, I keep bumping that. On the next page, we have information about the salaries and the wage and the number of jobs. We estimate 517 full-time and 310 part-time jobs. Roughly 380 are estimated to be entry-level positions. 58,600 is the average annual salary for the full-time jobs, and the part-time jobs they'll make about 11,000 to 12,000 a year. This is in an MVA Class B area. It's special mixed use, strategic land use area. Again, it's a $97 million project seeking a $17.2 million TIF, $2.2 million, 2.3 almost in new revenue to the city over 10 years, and $29.9 million to the city over 30 years.
And did we get word from the comptroller and the budget division? They have reviewed these and are in support. Is that correct? The comptroller does support the project. Okay.
And as I related my conversation with Mr. Payne, he didn't have any issues with RPA 2. His question was on the tax abatement issue.
Okay. And since you answered, he's comfortable now with.
I guess he's distrustful of SLDC. I don't want to misrepresent where Mr. Payne is. And if it...
So I thought the project was not getting tax abatement.
It's not getting tax
but
abatement.
They're concerned
that tax abatement in the 353 for SLU, it requires specific action by SLDC for anybody within either the Foundry or the Armory to receive tax abatement, but
They haven't.
budget
given it
director's a
yet.
cautious man.
Yeah, they haven't given it yet. They may not.
So what he's saying is he's worried that SLU might grant tax abatement, is that what you're
That's his concern.
Okay. So could we preempt, I mean,
I have an amendment that actually could be put on the bill that would deal with that situation if the committee feels that SLDC's handling of it would not be.
well,
down the
maybe in the
slippery slope.
abundance of caution or whatever, we could do that. Before we get to that point, though, why don't we open it up? I think everybody, we've kind of got the broad brush. If anybody wants to drill down, let's go ahead and provide committee oh, is there anybody who signed in to speak for, or against the project, our board bills? Bill. Amanda, you're okay? Okay. Let's go through the committee then. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions regarding this project?
Sure. I have a few. It's a pretty thick bill here. Some of the writing, I need a magnifying glass on the appendix, but I have some general questions. There it is. Huh? $5 for Walgreens. I have bifocals, you know, having issues. Okay, so got that answered already. In the bill itself, on page 4, where in section 6, where it talks about in addition to the payments in lieu of taxes described in section 5 of this ordinance, 50% of the total additional revenue from taxes, it goes on the page. Tell me what that's all about. What does that really say in layman's terms? 261, page 4.
Section 8.
So it's in addition to the pilots, basically.
Oh, section 6.
Line 19.
Okay. Basically that covers what's referred to as the EATS provision.
Okay.
The economic activity taxes.
Gotcha. Okay. That lines up.
Yep.
Tell me why this project is needing 100% of the pilots instead of 50%, and what is that equal? What is 100% equal to in revenue?
I don't remember, you have down the pilots, the 100%.
I don't have a breakdown in front of me, but,
I don't have the breakdown anyway, but.
Because that's not normal.
I can tell you, I mean, as Mr. Ferry testified, the rate of return on this project is actually below even what normally is seen on projects like this. So if you remove another revenue source from this, you know, it doesn't work. And it's already utilizing its CID and its ED.
Yeah, that's another set of questions, Bill. Mr. Chairman, historically, TIFs are just 50% of pilots and EATs, aren't they?
I think it's 50% of EATs, but not pilots.
We've historically done 100?
100% of pilots.
Okay.
That's normal.
Okay, and Bill, what's the average developer's fee percentage of a project? Or maybe that's Jonathan.
You have a
We have a range of a percentage of a project that we try to keep developers in, Jonathan?
So the way that I handle it is generally, rule of thumb, this is sort of on nationwide averages, about 4% of a project cost will be developer overhead, and anything that's developer fee above 4% will at some point go back to the developer. So usually it's deferred several years out. So what I do is I take anything above that 4% and I include that in their rate of return. So it's being reflected in that rate of return. So if the developer fee is too high to the point that it causes the rate of return to be high, then it's going to cause the incentive to come down. In this case, the developer fee is probably, I mean, it says it's 7%. I mean, I probably see them normally in the range of 4 to 7. So it's on the high end of the
Okay.
normal range, but
You just said that sometimes developers put their overhead in the developer's fee. That's awful risky. If you run into problems on a project.
well, just because it's developer fee doesn't mean that it's always deferred. So it's a use of funds. Well, in this case, it is deferred. But yeah, in this case, it's a deferred developer fee. So I mean, I can let them attest to why they're doing it that way. But yeah, it's
Hey,
a little
Bill
bit
could
risky
take
doing
over.
it that way.
Thanks.
Yeah, just a couple things. So projects, I bought this building on December 22nd, 2015. And so everything I've spent since then, which is a lot, is part of that overhead of development fee, including her payroll and all the other people that worked on this project. So, so the development fee, the 7%, is including the real costs to get from December 22nd, 2015 to today, and until we actually break ground and move forward. The other thing I wanted to say, and I think it came up earlier, this project, this RPA does not have any tax credits. It's all new construction. The first phase was largely historic, and so we had the state and federal historic tax credits to help us with the cost to make it competitive in the marketplace. This phase is 4 new buildings without any federal or state historic tax credit support.
Okay, stay right there. So let me make sure I was clear what you said. You're saying that your acquisition costs and everything is taking you from 2015 to now is basically deferred and is within the developer's fee. Is that right?
We hope to be able to reimburse that at construction start. So
Okay.
right now, we haven't been paid anything.
Got you. So within the construction itself, all that overhead is taken out of what? Once it starts?
Once it starts, our investors and our lenders will be providing the capital to reimburse us for that overhead cost.
Okay, so what's the cost right now that you're hoping to recapture that's inside the developer's fee?
We're kind of blending it into multiple RPAs, because while we're here with different RPAs that have different support from the city, as we move the project forward, it's one project. And so Alamo Draft House will be built at the same time as the project that's in RPA 1. We have spent, I think, $19 million as we sit here today, without not a penny of income. So we hope that would all be refinanced effectively when we start construction through our bank financing and our investors.
And let me add, and the lenders that will be involved in financing the new house and the other construction, they usually put restrictions also on access to developer fee. So they may say, you can only use this after all this other stuff is paid.
Right. Okay, I got it. So what I just heard you say, what's his name again?
Oh, Steve.
Steve, what I heard you say is some of this is spread across this what do we want to call it? The money you've spent up front has been spread across
RPAs 1 and 2.
RPA 1. And so, but you're charging the overhead to each specific project, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so tell me what's going to happen, and I'm not on Ways and Means, it might have already passed out, but what are the funds for the CID used for?
So the SID is split half between capital, I'll call it capital for building our security, infrastructure, and things like that, and then half is for operations, of which a portion of we've committed to a potential transportation system in the general Midtown area. So part of it's operations, clean and safe, and transportation, and part of it is capital to build the infrastructure for clean and safe.
And what's the TDD used for?
The TDD is assisting in our infrastructure, which is our roads, parking, sewers. We're completely rebuilding all the sewers in this area because it's a big site, 15 acres. Electric infrastructure, gas lines, water, all of that.
Okay. And what's the value on the CID and the TDD?
In RPA 2?
Yeah, this one.
What you guys answer that? Do you know?
CID and the TDD.
Collectively, 3.2 million.
Yeah.
Okay. You said that you've gotten some federal and state tax credits, is that
On
correct?
RPA 1.
Oh, and you didn't get it on this one, and that's why you need the CID and the TDD.
We don't have the same sources of capital on RPA 2 that we did have in RPA 1, because there are no federal tax credits or state tax credits available on RPA 2.
And what does the transportation piece looks like? What does that look like? You're
Yeah,
going to spend some of the
so-
CID on.
We have really two broad areas of transportation. One is we're building roads and sidewalks both in the site and around the site. So we are building new roads in or sidewalks in Vanaventer, Forest Park Parkway, and Spring, the three sides of our site, which is public. And then we're building a road through the middle of the site. But we're also providing 1,400 spaces of off-street parking in RPA 1 and 2, 400 spaces in RPA 2. And that goes back to what I said in my introductory comments. If we're going to compete to bring these tenants that can go anywhere, Alamo Draft House comes to St. Louis, and we know they looked in, I don't want to name the municipalities, but several Midwest County municipalities for their location. And typically, they're in those type of locations where the parking is abundant and free. And as a provision of them coming here, we had to provide a minimal number of free parking spaces within a diameter of their facility. And so the TDD and the TIF is helping us construct public infrastructure transportation, which is road and primarily parking, to meet that requirement.
So will the parking be available to the public for free?
Free to the public.
Okay.
Absolutely.
No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Davis, any questions?
I just have a brief comment. A project like this has to have a lot of innovation, and so it appears as though you are quite prepared to do that. So I'm going to make a request that you bring Tom Chi here. Tom Chi, you know that's the grilled cheese franchise. Oh, we don't have one anywhere near Missouri. And so again, when those people come here for their family vacations and all those things, they come here because we're reasonable in our hotel rates. They come here because we have a lot of new innovative things always for them to do. And then when they spend their money here, those dollars come into our city coffers, and we need a lot of it. So I'm just excited about both of these projects right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Kotar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just note for the record, my firm's engaged a little bit to help on this project, so I'm going to abstain from voting on Board Bill 261 and 262. Thanks.
Alderman Ogilvie?
Thanks. There's kind of a lot to go through here. Can we go back to the part where a residential component was removed from this project?
Sure.
Just start
So
there.
that was a bit of a disappointment, actually. So in the master plan that we presented when we brought forth the overall TIF, we had shown a 26-story tower on the site, this site right here, to the west of the parking garage. That site presently has a metal shed building sitting on it today if you drive down Forest Park and see it. The entire Federal Mogul site was put on the National Register of Historic Places, I think it, November of 2016, and therefore the entire site is under the purview of the National Park Service. And they objected to us putting a high-rise on that site, basically because the site never had a high-rise on it, and this is a site designation, not an individual building designation. So in order to qualify for the historic tax credits, we were not going to be allowed to put a high-rise on that site. So that's what led to us taking that off. We would love to do residential. We want to do residential somewhere in the development in the future, but it'll be in land that we presently don't own.
Okay. I guess the challenge for me on this one is, so the movie theater, so I don't know very much about the relative health of the movie theater industry in St. Louis. I mean, clearly there's there's not that many screens in the city. There's far more screens outside of the city. Kind of running through my mind, the existing screens in the city, some are definitely in buildings that have had substantial subsidies, like MX downtown. Moolah only has one screen, but I assume that building's on the National Register. The Chase Park Plaza has had lots of incentives. Tivoli, which is not in the city but close, has not. The High Point has not. So I may be questioning that substitution effect a little bit at 25%. So that 25% might be across both these projects, which is like I'm forgetting the name of the recreational game place.
Punch Bowl Social.
Punch Bowl Social, thank you. I can imagine maybe a lower substitution effect there and maybe a higher substitution effect on the screens, but I just don't know, right? I mean, it's impossible for me to know if we're pulling sales from Ronnie's in South County or if we're putting the movie theater in my neighborhood out of business. So that is a little bit of a challenge for me, especially when this is a lot of parking. This is a lot of the subsidy, I assume, is going to create all this free parking, which doesn't necessarily exist at some of these other theaters. So I hate to subsidize retail in the city that puts other retail out of business.
What about theaters have free parking?
Could I make?
My theater doesn't have free parking. Thank you.
Kidding?
No.
But one comment and something to think about, because it gets a little more difficult than that even, Alderman, because, for example, this brand is looking for a location in the St. Louis region. If they decide to locate in Maplewood, what's the substitution effect and what's the impact on the city at that point? At that point, we've lost everything. So it's a difficult.
Isn't that what the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership is supposed to do, is prevent that from?
Well, they haven't, and nobody has, and obviously the inner ring suburbs are very hot to try to, and have done economic development, all ringing the western parts of the city. So I'm just throwing it out to you that it's a very fluid situation as to substitution.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, there's sort of a level of complexity here that is beyond me at some point, and I'm not even sure what questions to
Can I add a
ask.
couple of comments
Yeah.
on the substitution effect? So part of the reason why this one is lower than what we would see, like if you were just to put a movie theater by itself somewhere else in the city, is because we have to look at, and granted this is based in large part on some assumptions, we try and look at where people are coming from and why they're coming. So if it was just a theater, then obviously their primary and maybe sole reason for coming is to go watch a movie at the theater. Whereas if they're coming because of the development around it, such as the retail or the office or just what have you, in other words, they're coming into the city when otherwise they might not be in the city at all in the first place. They might pick up a movie when it wasn't like sort of like the plan was, hey, let's just go to a movie kind of thing. So that does help bring that substitution effect rate down a little bit. I think it's been a while since I've done the numbers, so I don't remember off the top of my head, but a significant portion of the estimated population that will be attending this would not be in the city otherwise, essentially. They wouldn't be, they're coming in not for the movie theater, they're coming in for the other stuff around it, and then getting a movie, watching a movie sort of while they're here sort of thing. So that's what helps drive it down. And then again, also, it is a weighted balance between the theater sales and the sort of video, whatever you want to call the sales of the other thing, the entertainment sales. So you're right. So like the entertainment sales, there's very little. I mean, entertainment is entertainment. People are they have a limited entertainment dollar. So it's not just one for one. I mean, theoretically, they could be going to one less Cardinals game or something, but in general, That portion has a much lower substitution effect rate because there is less sort of direct competition in the city. And whereas the movie theater does have a higher rate, again, I would probably say it's probably about, 10 and 40 or something, and they average out to about 25. So.
I guess I don't 100% buy the assumption that people show up someplace and then just happen to see a movie. It seems to me like people, like, that's the driver, because it's 2 hours long. Maybe you do something else after the movie, but I feel like the movie is the destination factor. So that's what worries me.
Well, the other thing is they might come to this theater instead of a theater that's in the county because of the other stuff that's around it.
Sure.
And everything.
Yeah. I mean, and that's good for us, but if they go to this theater and not the movie theater next to my house, that's bad for my neighborhood. So that's the challenge here. Thanks.
Alderwoman Boyd, any questions?
I don't have any questions. I'm really excited about the project. I think this is a really good project, so thank you.
Alderman Bosley?
Thank you. I just wanted to say I feel the alderman there. Hey, you know what? I think it is really cool though to have options. And I think in time, as our population grows in the city, you might have, like we just had a movie come out that I think, I forgot what the name of the Black Panther movie. It was sold out everywhere, so everybody around the city couldn't get a ticket. So, as time goes on and we do get a higher population, new movies will come out and people will be excited about going to go see things. And, maybe they'll be at all the theaters, especially when, you have those good movies that sell out everywhere. So I think it's definitely any large project, I think, that makes the city look more of a place where things are happening. It gives us a different outlook because people kind of see the city as being stagnant. A lot of people don't see all of the different projects and the different moving parts that the city really has going on. And you got all these other cities that are taking entertainment to like a new level. It's I just think it's always nice to have nice projects and different things coming into the city that we can highlight and say we've got this coming and that coming. That makes people want to come back also at the same time, because as you know, our population is continually kind of dwindling and has been, I think, over the last 20 years. So I think anything to get people thinking this is the place to come and stay, and that's in any ward, I think would be nice to have in the city. So I definitely welcome the project. I did have one question in particular with the finances. It says that your average annual salary for full-time jobs will be $58,000. And the part-time salaries will be $11,000. Now, of course, the way you set up your business is the way you set it up, of course. I just would like to at least get some information on the full-time jobs. Will those be jobs that are requiring, particular degrees? What is it's a substantial difference there between the full-time and the part-time?
Sure. So we really have three business types in RPA 2. We have the theater, and I appreciate your comments about Alamo. If anybody knows much about Alamo Drafthouse, very innovative company based in Austin, Texas, founded in Austin, Texas, and they're bringing their vibe to St. Louis, and they decided this is where they want to be. So I think it really reinforces the kind of new St. Louis brand, and so I appreciate your comments around that. That is good. They serve food in the theaters, full menu, so they're going to have a lot of food service workers in the Alamo Drafthouse. They told us they'd hire 140 people, so that's probably a lot of part-time help at the lower skill level, but they will have those jobs. Below the Alamo and in the first floor of the two office buildings is traditional retail, and so there'll be a manager-level person in those, and then there'll be retail workers, which is a different, also probably part-time with some full-time. In the office space of both buildings, those are office jobs, and primarily we're expecting those to be technology jobs because we're basically an extension of Cortex. And so that's probably at the upper end of the spectrum from a job standpoint. It's our goal to be diverse in every aspect of this project. And so we like to think that we're bringing all types of jobs for all types of people. And that's really what we're trying to do here.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's yeah, just wanted to know, and I think if I remember correctly, you said it'll be about the projected income is $10 million a year. In the event that you exceed those numbers, of course that's always a good thing, especially for the business. It's a lot of different things you can do with with that excess funds. With those excess funds, would there be any way? And I'm just always looking out for the little guy, because I and I look out for everybody, but in the event that does happen, I just like to ask, on the front end, would there be any way you all could possibly incentivize those people on the lower level to possibly, create, well, you all create possibly a scholarship fund or something like that to help those people who are working those lower jobs to, advance on as time goes on, and possibly get some type of education, and maybe get a larger job or a better job, and within the company.
Yeah. So we're the landlord, so the 10 million of sales would be to Alamo, not to the landlord.
Understood.
The sales taxes from that 10 million, however, come to the city and would pay off the TIF sooner. So if they exceed that 10 million, and I think there's a good chance that they could, because that's their average location, then we would pay off the TIF more quickly, if I'm correct. In terms of Alamo and some of our other tenants, they're a very, very progressive company. They're very progressive in social issues. In the New York Times, for instance, when they got a lot of criticism. When Wonder Woman came out about 6 months ago, they did a screening women only.
All right.
Got a lot of criticism for that.
And they paid
You know what they did?
children to come
They did a second
to
screening with
schools,
women
too.
only.
I think that's pretty dope.
So they really push some things like that. I think we can approach them about they definitely see themselves as engaging with the community. It's at the appropriate time, I would be happy to introduce you to the people from Alamo. Independent of that, we've agreed to do a slate office on site. So we're actually doing it on site, much like Ballpark Village has. We've also made an agreement, right now it's only in handshake form, with the developers of the Armory. So rather than having a bunch of different slate locations where people don't know they have to go to a bunch of different locations to try and find a job, we're going to do a centralized one at City Foundry, so that as we have these jobs and are looking to place people and also educate them, we have a slate office on site.
That is awesome. That's all the questions I have. I'm excited, though.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of just quick questions. Can you talk to me about phase one, and is it the same ownership composition, and this $97 million capital stack that's before us now, that's just for phase two, correct?
That's for RPA 2, and I want to differentiate between a phase and an RPA.
I got lost there. If you would, that'd be great.
So the 97 million is for RPA 2. And as Bill outlined, there are 4 components of RPA 2. The first component of RPA 2 is actually going to be built with RPA 1. And so a little bit confusing.
I'm with you.
But we have a tenant, and so we can build it at the same time.
I understand. Got it. Got it. But, I mean, same ownership composition throughout all phases and all RPAs.
So the future phases of RPA 2 could fall under a separate ownership, because we could theoretically have a partnership with an anchor tenant coming in. We don't know. Those will primarily office. And so we have had interest from national companies and some local companies that would want a significant location there. And you know how deals come together.
Sure.
They may want to be in the deal. And so that's be a different ownership structure.
Okay, great. I mean, Mr. Chairman, the premise really of my question is I know that phase one, some members of my organization just had a meeting with you all about potential investment in tax credits. So out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to abstain from here, just knowing that you're
That's right.
You're playing the field in terms of your financing partners, but I just know that members of my organization talk to you, so
exactly.
I just want to make sure that I was really asking a question to make sure if I could be conflicted or not. So out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to abstain on this vote.
Okay.
concludes all the questions. Let's see. Is there a desire that we include the kind of poison pill for the tax abatement? I mean, do people feel that that's appropriate, or?
I just have to make a comment, and then everybody else can weigh in on it. I think we're going down a slippery slope. When you've passed legislation and the expectations of the developer and the others involved are there, and then you subject the opportunity to be as successful as you can be in the process, I don't want to go down that slippery slope. So it's up to you what you want to do. I'm not telling you what to do, but I just don't want to go there.
We don't really want to do it, we don't think it's necessary.
Because I don't want to set that standard for that kind of changing of the process midstream. I just don't want to do that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this was a question I had earlier, I forgot, because I'm a little conflicted with the tax abatement and the TIF area. Because it was my understanding that you can't do both in the same area. So is there a certain area that's carved out that's not part of?
No,
the TIF?
technically you can.
You can?
You can, yes. And that's, I think well, I know the previous phase did have that,
Yeah,
or the
that
big
we had.
previous phases and RPAs. They're a previous phase / RPA.
One had that.
Bill, can you take the microphone for us?
Certainly. There's several projects that do utilize that. And I'll give you, for example, a quick example. If you're going to build a project and it's all going to be under TIF, 100% of the pilot payments are made into the TIF. They go there. But, number one, the developer has to come up with the cash, or the owner has to come up with the cash to pay that pilot payment in. The collector then takes 2% of it as a collection fee. Then it goes back out into the
Here,
special allocation
I'd like to
fund.
cut. Why don't you go ahead, rather than go through all this stuff, let's just go ahead and put the language in there. We got other stuff to do. So, why don't we just go ahead and do that, and then we don't, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. Are you okay?
I can talk to him later about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can explain later.
I'm
It's
sorry.
much more efficient to use tax abatement.
I just think it might be more time efficient for us to just go ahead and include this rather than to discuss why we should.
Because they're the ones supposed to make those decisions, not us.
Okay, the chair will entertain a motion for, to put board, or to pass Board Bill number 261. We're gonna, no, we're gonna do the amendment after we, so you do the,
And the amendment is to 262.
Okay.
oh, the amendment's on 262, okay. So first, let's start with 261, we'll pass that out. So if someone care to make a motion?
Chairman, I move that we pass Board Bill 261 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
So, second.
It's been moved and seconded, we are not gonna use the previous roll. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar. Abstain. Alderman Ogilvie. Alderman Boyd, or Alderwoman Boyd.
Hope he doesn't run into problems.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Roddy.
Aye.
President Reed. So you have, it did, so we have.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so Board Bill 261 passes. Now, let's go ahead and somebody make a motion, if we could. The chair will entertain a motion on Board Bill 262, and then before we actually take the vote, we'll go ahead and we'll do the amendment. So if we could have a motion for Board Bill 262.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we put Board Bill 262 before our committee for consideration.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Now, before we take the vote on it, the chair will entertain a motion on amendment number 1 for Board Bill 262.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt amendment number 1 for Board Bill 262.
So that
Second.
it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of
Have a
amendment?
discussion real quick.
Oh, sure.
The developers who I want to talk to. So, you feel very confident that you want this amendment?
Well, I will say that I am not asking for tax abatement.
Uh-huh.
And in all the years I have stood before the city in any of this, I always believe I've delivered on what I would say. And I intend to keep that promise.
Okay.
So we are not going to use tax abatement here. If we
Okay.
need to add this additional provision, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
But our reputation is extremely important, and we do what we say we're going to do, and we're not going to use tax abatement here.
Okay, that's what I need to hear.
And just so I'm clear, this is for your future site. If you decided to go out and build another building that's in a different RPA, and we may end up seeking tax abatement, not TIF on that or something. You know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask a point clarification for order. I made a motion on 262 to put it before us. Did we vote on that?
No.
No.
So we're going to vote on the amendment. The amendment will then attach to the bill, and then we'll vote on the underlining bill.
We don't have to vote to put it before us and then vote on the amendment?
I think we just had the motion to attach the amendment, didn't we?
We didn't.
We haven't voted on it yet.
voted on it yet.
I just procedurally, I wanted to go back because I thought we might have missed a step.
Okay, well, I think they're one and the same, but if you'd like.
No, I'm just asking for
okay.
procedural reasons. I'm
Okay,
fine with it.
so we are voting on to attach, or to adopt the amendment number 1 to Board Bill 262 at this point, so. If we could.
I made that.
Okay. So that's been moved and seconded. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar. Abstain. Alderman Ogilvie. Aye. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
President Reed. You have 5 votes.
5 ayes.
Yes.
Okay, so it passes. So the amendments that have been attached to the bill now, it's passed. So now we can vote on the underlying bill. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll for Board Bill number 262 as amended.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar. Alderman Ogilvie. Present. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg. Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
President Reed. You have 5 aye votes, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Great. Okay, so Board Bill number 262 passes out. Now, what's our?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
And then we have 2 more sheets up there. Do we have, how many, do we have any more? Which one is 263? Oh, it was Middlebrook, but we announced that Middlebrook was not, no one is here for Middlebrook, or for Board Bill 263, are they? Okay, so the last Board Bill is 186. Alderwoman Davis. Sure. Proceed, Alderwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Board Bill number 186 is an amending ordinance to the Grand Center, Inc. development plan. As you know, for those who have been on the committee for a while, this is our 9th appearance before you as we have developed different projects in the Grand Center redevelopment area. This agreement is amending that plan for the Fox parking garage, which was recently finished and has added a great deal to the area and providing additional parking that is so needed for a community that has entertainment on all levels, whether it's theater, galleries, special events. We currently sell approximately 3 million tickets for that in Midtown area for the entertainment district, which constitutes a lot of tax dollars that come to the city coffers from sales in restaurants, bars, and everything else. So one of the things that I want to do is to ask Will Zorn to come forward and give you all the technical details, and then we'll be available for questions. Mr. Zorn.
Thank you, Alderwoman Davis. Good morning, or good afternoon if that's where we are. Afternoon. This is a board bill amending the redevelopment area for the Grand Center District TIF. The TIF gets amended from time to time as projects come on or drop off. This is a project that was contemplated. 2 parking structures were contemplated in the original TIF, but as the years go on and things don't get necessarily built in the order that you originally planned for, or something gets built in another part of town, things are added to and removed from the TIF plan. This amendment is to take, it's twofold, but on one project, the Fox parking garage, which was always contemplated and desired in the district, it originally was slated to authorized to receive over 2.1 million in TIF under the redevelopment plan. Fast forward 15 years, Fox Associates decided to and was able to, and Grand Center Inc., my client, cooperated with them for them to build their parking garage, over 600 space garage, on what had been surface parking. So it's obviously a higher and better use of the property for essentially the same purpose, helpful to the district overall and to Fox. And Fox decided, and Grand Center supported, that they decided to pursue tax abatement rather than the whole TIF process. As Mr. Keeling mentioned, it's just kind of a nimbler way, more efficient. And they used tilt-up construction. Time was of the essence. They were good to go. Grand Center, in pledging to cooperate with them, needs to amend the redevelopment agreement to allow for abatement of certain spots of the Fox parcels in this instance. And so it's the amendment you have before you just allows that. It really just calls out the parcel addresses and allows for the 10-year tax abatement. It doesn't cause the 10-year tax abatement to occur. That's something Fox will do separately. But it's to allow for abatement in the TIF district. About in 2011, Grand Center, as the developer of the district-wide TIF, refinanced all the TIF notes that were outstanding at that time, got a better rate with IDA bonds. So there's a trust indenture. The bondholders are entitled to the stream of pilots and eats generated in the TIF district to pay the bonds down. This, by virtue of authorizing the abatement, Grant Center has the added task of amending the trust indenture to essentially prepay what the bondholders would get on these parcels, which were just surface parking. So the amendment of the trust indenture, there's a process already in place. They prepay the time value money of what the bondholders would have got to the bonds, and then this project is allowed to go forth sort of separate from the bonds by prepaying. So the end result is the project gets done, and it's beneficial overall to the district, and collaterally it's beneficial to the prepayment of the bonds. So it's a win-win, especially if you're trying to park in the arts and entertainment district. So that's why we're here.
So I want to make sure I understand. So by abating this, there'll be no revenue from this going in to pay the TIF bonds, is that correct?
No, it's more beneficial than that. They're prepaying what they would have paid, what they were projected to have paid. They are prepaying to the bondholders. They weren't projected at very high because it was surface parking. Additionally, then, after it's constructed, it'll be abated, but any portion that's not abated will also go to prepaying the bonds in the district and retire the debt of the district in a more efficient
I'm sorry, I'm just having, who's benefiting from the tax abatement? Is it so you have a surface lot and you're going to build a parking garage on it, the taxes are going to get frozen. The owner of the parking lot's not going to pay any increase, is that correct? In taxes?
That's correct, for the term of the abatement. Now the project may generate more
but that doesn't,
gross receipts, for example. So
but that doesn't benefit the TIF notes, right? So that
no, it does, because it's still in the TIF district. It's not been removed from the district. It's been the bonds have been essentially released as to those parcels, but they haven't been removed from the district.
So the collateral has increased. That's basically what we're at.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving them tax abatement, but the collateral has increased because now we have a 600 parking garage there.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, let's say, 100 or 150 surface spots, or 200.
Okay. Any questions, Alderman Boyd?
Yes. How many years was the TIF? I guess I'm Alderwoman Davis.
I think the TIF had a 20 or 25 year life.
Yeah.
Okay, and how many, so I didn't see in here how many years the tax abatement would run.
Only 10.
I'm looking at,
It would allow for up to 10.
Yeah. But we still have to go through the financial analysis, the SLDC, all of that, because I'm demanding that.
so is there gonna be another board bill separate for tax abatement, or is, we're doing it within this bill?
That would be from the owners, Fox Associates.
We still have to come before you.
Okay, the question is, will there be a 10-year tax abatement bill presented?
If that is what we agree on.
Okay, okay, or a tax abatement bill, period. Okay, gotcha. I thought that we were actually amending it and putting the tax abatement within here, but that's not what we're doing. We're just amending this, saying that in lieu of the TIF, we're gonna do a tax abatement.
Yes.
Okay, got it. That,
Yeah,
600 part desperately needed in Grand Center, that's for sure. I just have a technical oversight I want to point to you. On your exhibit, page 3, you might want to change the name of the register.
Ah, yeah.
Some time has passed.
So, no further questions or comments. Thank you.
Alderman Kotar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, is this garage built? Are we talking about the garage? It's constructed already, right? Or is it
Yeah.
under construction?
It is.
So have we already approved a tax abatement on it?
I'm not sure if Fox pursued the tax abatement yet. I know they began. I'm not sure where it's ended. But that, we need for housekeeping from the TIF perspective and the redevelopment perspective to make sure that's allowable.
Okay, and then I guess we started to talk about, I guess, the gross receipts tax from parking generated in the parking garage. Is that an eats payment in the TIF? Or is that-
I believe it is an each
Okay,
payment.
so 50% of that's going towards the TIF, 50% of that coming to the city? Okay.
Just as it would have if it were a TIF project instead of an abatement project. It had, the parcels are not removed from the TIF.
Okay, so you're just removing the
Prohibition.
the property tax, the pilots that would go towards paying off the TIF, if under a normal TIF situation, you're not doing that. Economic activity taxes still going in towards the TIF payments. We're just looking for a simple abatement to freeze taxes on this parcel. I think I get it.
That's accurate.
I'm going to vote for it. All right, thanks.
Alderman Ogilvie?
I don't understand how this stuff gets so complicated, honestly. I don't understand, so I'm just gonna abstain.
Shot at it, okay. So, when we decided to do area TIFs, that's what got so complicated. So, when we gave the development rights to Grand Center to develop that area, you now have another layer, just like the 353 we gave to SLU. So now you have this development corporation that we gave permission to make decisions about TIFs and tax abatement. But we also said you have to come before this committee and let us know what you're doing, and we give it kind of like a second approval on it, although they make the decisions for that development area. After that point, anything that they do in contrary to that, it's according to the projects. So some projects got TIF in that development area, some projects got tax abatement, some projects came out of the development altogether. So, give you an example, I took Sweetie Pies out of that development area, and she got her own separate incentive. So it can get even more complicated. It's unfortunate, but that's what we've done.
I guess I just don't understand. The garage is there and the garage is operating, right?
Yes, sir, it is. And I can give you the background on that as well. So we were trying to get the garage approved through the Fox Associates process. It got complicated, it got delayed. Then when it came back, they wanted to move forward. It got held up in the building division. Everybody was focused on trying to get all these various approvals from these various entities. And the moment it came together, we just pushed for construction because it was a construction period that if we had missed it, then we would have been delayed another 4 to 6 months, and we didn't want that. We went ahead and gave the building division went ahead and gave all the permits and moved forward. Then the bill got lost here. That's another problem. So this probably should have came before you 3-4 months ago. And I'm going to have to develop a new process for myself to track my bills because this is the second one that's been lost. So, and that normally doesn't happen. But that was another delay. So I couldn't stop them from building. All I can do is keep moving forward as best I can.
Okay. I'm just gonna have to admit I don't know what I'm looking at on this one. That's all I've
It's
got.
a lot.
Thank you.
It's a lot. And as I shared with you, this is the ninth time I've been before you since I've been an alderman on this project. And before that, the previous alderman had been before you a number of times, too.
Alderwoman Boyd?
I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah,
I've learned on this.
Keep it open, and somebody will ask a question that'll help me understand it. Alder,
I could take another example.
well, let's try to, let's kind of walk it through. So you have a TIF district out there, correct?
Right.
And
And a
we're,
pl- and a
and we
plan.
had an agreement with the city to establish that district. Now, this bill is amending that, the rights of that TIF district.
The
So-
redevelopment agreement, yeah.
So that,
So that agreement calls for no tax abatement to be given in the district because that would undermine the TIF. Right. Okay.
Right.
And so.
what we're saying is for this one case, we're gonna permit tax abatement.
And on another occasion, we were here to have Sweetie Pies have its own freestanding TIF. So we amended the redevelopment plan to do that. And then subsequently, we were here on the Barnett, which is 3505 Washington, I think. 30. It's the second building in from Compton. And they, they were gonna rehab, and they have rehabbed. And there was not TIF available for that project. It wasn't a project contemplated. And they didn't ask for TIF. They asked for, and Grant Center agreed, we want to pursue tax abatement. So we were here before you on that instance doing what we're doing here. And that is to take that parcel to prepay the bonds and to allow for tax abatement.
Okay, so then your TIF district agreed for roughly how much in bonds?
What they,
How much in bonds are for the TIF district?
I don't have that figure. It was all the TIF notes on all the individual projects.
But
A
weren't
US
you kind
bank.
of doing a TIF district and some of the money was going to public improvements and things like that, Don?
Yeah, Grand Center as the developer in the.
So if you pull a parcel out, then that's reducing your bond capacity, is that what you're saying?
No, the bonds refinanced all the TIF notes. As the project was done, there was a TIF note, and US Bank at the time, and held most of those. And now we're doing the history of the TIF. The IDA bonds were issued to pay off all the TIF notes, and a trust indenture was entered into, and Grand Center, as the developer of the district-wide TIF, pledged all the revenues from the TIF, all the projects, everything, to pay off the bonds. So that was a new layer, if you will, of not so much regulation, but financing requirements. And so when the Barnett was done, and when this project was contemplated to be done with tax abatement, we have to amend our plan with the city so that they will allow tax abatement. And so that's what we're here doing.
And but the building's already, the garage is already built, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's open to the public. It's open, the VA is parking there, and there was some issue with the.
How long has it been open though?
It just opened mid last year. So abatement runs from January 1, essentially.
Of last year?
No, you got to finish your project, and then, because it's a condition precedent to do your project to receive abatement.
Okay.
So
who has granted them abatement then?
I don't know that they have been granted abatement. This amendment will allow them to seek and obtain abatement separately.
Aren't they supposed to do that before they?
Not necessarily. The abatement will run when the project is completed, so you try to get.
And who would be the granting authority? Would the city grant the tax abatement through an ordinance or?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So it wouldn't be sluice, it's not inside a sluice area?
No.
So you would have to come back to get abatement?
The Fox would come back and get abatement as the owner of the parcel and the project, yes.
So this is just creating the opportunity for them to do that?
Exactly. Allowing.
So we anticipate, at some point, we anticipate Fox to come before us?
Yeah, and I don't know where they are in that process, and maybe they've already completed it, and the final granting of the abatement is waiting for this cleanup. This was to be done, you know, before January 1, but we got a little crosswise, timing-wise.
Okay. Alderman Bosley, did you have any questions? Or?
I think I don't really have a question. I just want to make sure that I think I understand this correctly. I guess in the simplest form, you are basically just amending a previous agreement so you can be allowed to apply for tax abatement, because the initial agreement, because you were in a TIF area, it was one or the other, and the agreement was to not allow any tax abatement at all. So you are just coming back after the development has, or you're at the point where it's almost complete, right?
Yeah, it's either complete or almost complete. I think they have an occupancy permit.
Okay, so you're just coming back at this point saying, okay, we utilize the TIF, right? And we're at this particular point just saying we're looking for tax abatement. Is that what's happening now? And you're just, once again, just amending this and giving them the opportunity to present their case on why they would like to have tax abatement.
Right.
Okay,
And they already had authority to do the TIF, but they chose and Grand Center agreed to assist and cooperate in allowing them to seek tax abatement instead.
Understood. And what they initially would have been paying as far as with the bond, they're just going to pay that off up front, right? So.
Right. The bondholders are made whole by essentially a prepayment of their projected bond income from those parcels. Yes,
Understood.
prepaid.
So everything will still balance out if we were to give them tax abatement.
Yeah, and you may be slightly ahead because there's more economic activity on the same footprint. There's a 4-story parking structure instead of just surface parking.
Okay. I think what might be kind of getting confused, and I might be speaking out of, I can't speak for everybody, but what it might sound like just from my perspective is why the initial agreement didn't work out for the lifetime of the actual project, and you know why Fox is asking at this particular point in time, coming back saying, hey, why do we want to get taxed? Even though we've done it before, I think that kind of where things are getting lost at. So I guess maybe if you can explain that, maybe it'll make things a little easier.
Sure. Before the redevelopment agreement was entered into, a plan was developed for the area for the district-wide TIF. And it said, well, we're gonna do a parking structure there and a parking structure there and improve that park and do the Woolworth building and do the 634 building. And it included things like an African-American museum that was later built elsewhere or slated to be built elsewhere. So one of the amendments to the agreement, for example, removed projects that were no longer going to happen. And similarly, we have to amend the agreement when new projects that weren't contemplated, you know, back before day one of the TIF. So if there's a new project that comes along and you want to support it with your TIF, you have to amend the redevelopment plan. Similarly, when a project was in for a TIF, as the parking structure was, and the decision is made to do it via another method, we had to amend the redevelopment route to allow for that other method being the tax abatement.
And it also gives you more capacity for another new project too, that could receive TIF within the development area.
And also the TIF has a lifespan of years. So the farther we get down the road, the less time there is to pay back any new TIF, if you will.
Understood, being someone coming in with a new project that wasn't there in the beginning of the initial planning of the project. So I get that we're kind of at a later date, so you got new players in the game. And, you know, it's just kind of a different time from when the project initially started, so.
Right,
Okay.
and you don't want to hamstring current development because you have an existing TIF that's aging. You want to be nimble and do what's best for the district and the
For the
city.
development, so it can continue to progress on. I understand that when things start to look up, people come in and they want to spend money. They want to say, hey, this looks, it's already rolling. When the bandwagon gets rolling, you want to hop in and put in your 2 cents at this point. So, yeah,
Right, so the Hotel On God in the former Missouri Theater Building, 634 North Grand, is a separate TIF from the district. So it has its own time clock. It has the whole life of the TIF to pay it back.
understood.
And similarly, this garage will have its 10 years independent of the TIF, and confusingly in the TIF district.
Right, understood. It's just, it was the initial agreement for it to be within the TIF district. So, I mean, which it still is within the TIF district, but
It's not receiving TIF.
it's not receiving TIF funding because it was not there initially when the plans were initially made. Is that what I'm understanding? They chose not to take the
It was
TIF.
included.
It was included,
For
but they
TIF.
chose not to take it, so they're still left open for one or the other because they didn't indulge in the beginning. Understood, because it gets paid off quicker, right?
So it's Grand Center's task in cooperating with them to amend our redevelopment agreement with the city.
Okay, yeah, understood. So once again, we're just amending this so we can have the conversation at a later date. Oh, thank you.
Alderman Oldenburg?
Sure, I'll be really quick because I think we've got it here. But I just want to make sure. What's the source of the prepayment to the bondholders?
That's Fox Garage's cash payment.
I see. Okay, so they're prepaying that
Right, the trust indenture for the bonds has a mechanism for prepayment because this was contemplated.
I see.
You know, there's going to be new.
I see.
Oh, so they're just taking a lump sum?
Yeah. No. Go ahead. That's what I
it's
didn't understand. They're just writing a check for the prepayment so
And
they
it's
can then
not
take a payment over the next
It's
10
not a terribly
years.
big check because the
Yeah.
parcels were
Sure.
surface parking, so they weren't
Right.
projected to have all that much.
But it was
income.
pledged collateral. That cash flow was pledged collateral, and that's why the bondholders.
Right,
but-
so that's our housekeeping as well,
Yeah.
allowing our trust indenture to be amended to allow for this as well.
So then, if we tax abate it, would, if it's carved out of the TIF, will all the eats generated, not that there's that many.
They should still come to
garage,
it.
But none of that will flow through then to the TIF, is that correct?
No, the eats
It
will.
would.
The eats will.
It
eats are
is,
still going to
it
flow
has
through.
not been carved out of the TIF district. It's just being allowed to do a different mechanism and prepaying the bonds. So it's still within the district, is what I'm
Okay,
saying.
so well, how much is left on the TIF then, after the 10 years? Or?
There's about, yeah, they always project them to pay off earlier, so it's like 5 or 7.
Okay.
And it's performing. And adding TIF projects would be detrimental to its performance, potentially.
To say that again, to the TIF's performance.
Well, to paying it off, because the TIF is coming to an end.
I see.
Just
I
the
see.
timing.
Yeah. Right.
What you would have to do is you'd have to offer them a smaller TIF incentive.
Yeah.
So that it made sense.
That's why it's more beneficial to do why you're doing TIFs within the larger TIF.
Right, and
But do they
Box.
pledge any, if you do a TIF within the TIF, is there any pledged payment to the Grand Center TIF?
yeah, the whole bond trust indenture pledges all the funds to the bondholders. And so what Fox is going to do is prepay the bondholders. They're projected.
Yep. But that happens when, and I know, but we moved on though. You were talking about sometimes that the Barnett was carved out as a separate TIF, right?
And so they prepaid.
They
the
did.
bond-
They did the same
And
mechanism.
Grand Center had to
Understood.
ask for this very thing for that project.
Gotcha. I'm with you now. Okay, that's it for me, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
I think I understand this one, standing on my tippy toes, but if there's no other questions, the
Chair will entertain a motion on this Board Bill number 186.
I move that we pass Board Bill 186 with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Kotar.
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvie. Present. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Chairman Roddy.
Aye.
President Reed. You have 7 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
Well, with that, we consider Board Bill 186 is heard and passed out of committee with due pass recommendation. I believe that's everything that was on the agenda, is it not?
Yes, sir.
All right. We are, somehow or another, we survived. We're here for trying to create some new records for our committee here, 3 hours and 45 minutes. Thanks, everybody, for your patience and diligence and sticking around.
Lunch, Mr. Chairman.